Good evening. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission for the Municipality of Anchorage. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Dean? Here. Mr. Ferguson?
Here.
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Strike?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays?
Here.
Mr. Cange?
Present.
Mr. Spinelli?
Here.
Mr. Walker has been excused. Thank you.
Very much. Before we start into our normal business, I've got two announcements. Number one, I apologize to the audience. We're going to move our agenda around a little bit. We're trying to get the public testimony items earlier in our meeting, so we're going to move the agenda around, so pay attention when we do that. The second point is I'd like to introduce and welcome to the Commission Commissioner Spinelli. This is his first meeting. Welcome. And
Thank you.
You're welcome on that. We have minutes from the April 13th, May 11th, May 18th, June 1st, and June 8th. Present. Anybody have any comments on those minutes? Mr. Spring.
Yes, I have comments on a couple of minutes. The minutes of April 13th, 2015. Excuse me a second. Page 9 of 10. I would like a little, I think my comments down towards the bottom of the page need a little clarification, and I believe I provided it during the meeting. It says that towards the end that this is for the Federal Highways portion, and AMATS is proposing to not come before the Planning and Zoning Commission for review of the interim transportation plan. And if you could please clarify that it wasn't that arbitrary. It was because the interim plan will not be used as an update of the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. That would make it clear, I think.
Anyone have any objection to the clarification offered by Commissioner Spring? Okay, we'll have the clerk make that change.
And on June 1st, 2015, minutes on page 4 of 9. Again, I think I usually just look at my comments to see if they or correspond to what I think I said. In this case, I don't think the first sentence is right. Maybe you can help me. Commissioner Spring noted that he agreed that the petitioner was put in a difficult situation. I don't believe that was correct.
Where are you?
No, it's on page 4 of 9 on June 1st. This involves the Salvation Army conditional use. If you remember correctly, they actually were told to come to the city to get it changed, and it wasn't that the petitioner was put in a difficult situation. It was that the staff was put into a difficult situation because they were requested to expedite the case. Is that correct, staff? Is that more or less correct? I mean, is it equivalent?
I have no trouble. You wanting to change the word petitioner to staff is what you're asking for?
Yes, I think that would be more
Does
accurate.
anyone have any objection to that change by Mr. Spring? Seeing and hearing none, clerk will make that change. Anyone have any other comments on the minutes? Mr. Just a minute. What? I'm told by the Commander-in-Chief that they don't have to be present to approve the minutes. So anyone have any other changes to the minutes? We will, seeing and hearing no objection, we will approve the minutes as revised. Ms. Dean, will you handle disclosures, please?
Commissioner Spring, do you have anything to disclose?
Only that I was not in attendance on the June, the last meeting in June, and so I will not be voting or abstaining on resolutions D1, C, D, and E.
Thank you. And Commissioner Kange,
None for me.
Commissioner Strike,
No.
Commissioner Ferguson,
No, ma'am.
Commissioner Robinson,
None.
Commissioner Spinelli.
Yeah. First night, so I'll abstain from things that were happening before my time, and I also have
Okay.
item G1 that I'll need to recuse from.
All right. So you will be reclused from all items on the consent agenda? Okay? And then you're asking to be excused from item G1 because I understand you have an interest in that case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Based upon the commissioner having an interest in the case, we will ask that Mr. Kange make a motion to require Mr. Spinelli to participate in case G1. We've got a motion seconded on that, direct him to participate. Please use your machines. Mr. Spinelli, you won't vote on this? That motion failed. Barely. So, Mr. Spinelli, you are excused from case G1. Also, Mr. Spinelli, you will be excused from the unfinished item, case 2014-0049, which will get moved. That because you did not, it's my understanding you did not listen to the public testimony?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kange, will you please do the consent agenda?
Excuse me, I'm not quite finished with
Okay, pardon me. Go
disclosure.
ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And Commissioner Sporhays.
None, thank you.
I do have two cases I will not be able to hear, D1A, D1B, on the consent agenda. I was not here for those. And I believe, Commissioner Ferguson, D1E was going to be pulled?
I will get to that when I get to the consent agenda
Thank you.
on that one. Okay, are we done with disclosures, Ms. Dean? Mr. Kange, now will you do the consent agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to the consent agenda and the regular agenda, I would like to propose some changes to the agenda. I would like to move item E1, case 2015-0049, to G3. And I would like to move G1, actually just like to swap G1 and G2. So G2 would become G1, and G1 would become G2.
Okay, just a second, Mr. Kange. For the audience, that means that case 2015-0059 will be heard first. Case 2014-0195 will be heard second. And case 2015-0049 will be heard third and last on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to the consent agenda, does any commissioner have an item to pull?
Commissioner Spring?
I just want to clarify the last motion to move the agenda. Obviously, E1 is the public hearing's been closed, so that should be noted, I think, because it was put under public hearings, G3. So just to clarify, no public hearing, right?
That's correct. There will not be a public hearing. We're just moving after the two public hearing items. We're trying to let the audience go home early tonight. Does anyone want to pull anything else from the consent agenda? I would like to ask that we pull Resolution 2015-029 from the consent agenda, please. we've got a motion to approve the consent agenda with item 2015-029 moved. Can we please use our machines? That has passed. I asked to pull I can't find it in my paperwork. Yeah. On Resolution 2015-029, paragraph A3 reads, and I quote, "The ordinance is not supported by the public who came to testify." My memory is that we had 3 people testify in support of the ordinance, and we had 3 people who testified against the ordinance. And I would like to strike line or paragraph A3. Staff, do you want to comment on that?
Mr. Chair, this was a statement that was made by one of the commissioners, but I would agree with your conclusion that there was varied testimony. My assumption of what that commissioner was meaning to say was that the people in support spoke as part of the Live Work Play Committee, and others who spoke against it were not, but I have no objection to your change.
By tradition, the chair can't make a motion, so would someone, the chair would ask, thank you, Ms. Dean, to make a motion, seconded by Mr. Strike. Any discussion? All in favor, or please use your machine. That carries. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, were we just approving the, did we just approve the whole resolution or just the amendment to the resolution?
I guess I asked for just the amendment. I guess we should probably have a motion to.
Could I ask a question then, Mr. Chair? On A6, the implementation of the entire new Title 21 should be postponed for another year. Was that actually a finding of fact that the Commission made?
Through the chair, Mr. Robinson, as you are discussing how you plan to vote, and then after your vote, when the chair asks for findings, various commissioners make statements. I don't feel like I'm in a position to place any weight on any of those statements. That was a statement that was made by one of the commissioners. No other commissioners objected to that statement, so I included it in the resolution.
I think the intent of what the ordinance does, it clearly does not attempt to set the new Title 21 aside, so unless the commissioner meant that the ordinance should go further than that, I think the clear intent of the ordinance was to basically set aside the multifamily design standards for at least another year. And so I don't know that I'm comfortable with the finding as is, but I respect that staff claims that it was stated.
In the cool light of dawn, I would say paragraph 6 is a little bit confusing. And so I would not object if somebody wanted to delete paragraph 6.
I guess I'd make a motion to say, if I could, implementation of the new Title 21 multifamily design standard should be postponed for another year. That at least gets closer to what the intent was, and I think that's accurate.
Okay. We have a motion. I have a second. Ms. Dean.
I was one of the people, maybe I was the only one that said to delay the entire Title 21 for another year. You could say that one or more commissioners felt that way, and it wasn't recognized by the entire commission. I don't know if I want to see my message deleted entirely, but I just am willing to qualify it that maybe I was the only one that said that. I also have another point of something, and that's A1, and that is the ordinance is not supported by staff. I'm not sure that needs to be the very first item on the page. That maybe can be at the end, not at the very beginning. So two points.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second by Commissioner Robinson.
Mr. Chair, I withdrew my motion. If that was the intent of one of the findings, then I'm comfortable. I thought it was a
Okay,
mistake.
okay. Ms. Dean, do you care to make a motion?
Yeah, I make a motion to modify my point 6, that implementation of the entire new Title 21 should be postponed for another year as viewed by one or more commissioners. Is that fair?
How about, let's make it look, how about one commissioner express the opinion that the implementation da-da-da-da-da?
That's fine.
Okay? So we have a motion. Do we have a second on that motion? We have a second by Mr. Robinson. Mr. Strike.
My question here to the commission is this the appropriate place to be making that type of finding? The finding itself, or the resolution itself, did not address the implementation of or the postponement of Title 21. We're dealing with a specific issue that we voted on. And I would say that if we're going to, as a body, not my words, put something in or sneak something into a finding of fact, into a resolution that we're voting on, this doesn't speak to that resolution. In my opinion, that statement does not belong at all in this finding of fact.
In my opinion, we put in findings of fact to help educate the people who read our resolutions and put forth our opinion. I believe it'd be a misstatement if we wanted it to read that the entire body felt that it should be implemented. But I think it's correct if one commissioner, and I believe the commissioner did, make a comment that they should postpone it. I think it's appropriate.
Okay.
Okay. We have a motion by Ms. Dean, seconded by Mr. Robinson. Clerk, you want to read that back, the motion back?
I can do it.
Go ahead, please.
One commissioner expressed the opinion that implementation of the entire new Title 21 should be postponed for another year.
Okay. Can we please use our machines on that? That motion has carried on that. Ms. Dean, do you want to make a motion on regarding item 1, A1?
Yes, I would like to move A1, which says the ordinance was not supported by staff, to the end and not at the very beginning. Since it is a Planning and Zoning Commission, it's nice that the staff put that information in there, but I don't think it should be the very first thing that you read when it's our findings.
So 1 would now become the new 8.
Yes.
Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to make a statement in staff of explanation, as I feel like perhaps staff is being criticized. I wrote this resolution, and what I do is I go back and I listen to the case and I write down the things in the order that people say them, and then I put them in the resolution in the order that people say them. And this was the very first finding that was made by the first person who made findings. So that's why it's first, not because staff was trying to make a point or direct the assembly to that particular finding. Thank you.
I agree with you completely, Ms. McConnell, that the staff report is given first, and so that's why it became first. But I also think we've got the right to move it to the back if we care to on that one. Mr. Kange, then Mr. Kange.
Thank you. I wouldn't support that motion either because the statements of facts are not prioritized in any certain way, and so I don't think we want to set a precedent of having that happen.
Okay. Ms. Dean, I don't know if I have a second yet on your motion.
I will withdraw my motion.
Okay, thank you very much on that one. Can we have a motion to accept the amended Resolution 2015-029? I don't think that's the right number, pardon me. Resolution 2015-0056. 2015-029, pardon me. Mr. Kange, seconded by Mr. Strike. Mr. Kange, do you want to speak to your motion, or?
I think we've
Okay.
discussed it enough.
All in favor, please use your machines. Okay, that motion carries. We will now go to case 2015-0059, an ordinance amending new Title 21, Section 21-11-070H3 to allow for window applications. Case G2. Do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just say briefly that this proposed change or this proposed ordinance allows two changes to the sign code to temporary signs in the all commercial districts, all industrial districts, the Turnagain Arm, Transition, and Airport zoning districts. It would allow temporary window signs for buildings that are under construction and not occupied to cover 100% of window area. So if you turn to the illustration that's 3 pages back in your packet, 3 separate pages that says H&M, it would allow the window signs that you see on the ground floor of the lower white portion of the building. The second change would allow new retail facilities to advertise using temporary window signs that cover 50% of the overall window area of an entire structure in which they are located for no more than 90 days, and that would allow the red H&M sign that you see in the photo. This was proposed by Assemblymember Johnston directly as a result of the H&M store that's going in at the Diamond Center, for the reasons stated in the staff report, that this is essentially allowing unequal treatment of different businesses. The staff does not support the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dean, then Mr. Robinson.
I had a question for staff. Erica, on the photo that's page, I guess, 5, if I remember right, when I've driven past, there's actually 2 rows of windows with signage on it right now on that building? Not just the lower, but there is above, too? Is that correct?
I haven't been by there recently. This photo, I think this is a combination of a photo and a rendering.
Okay.
But it is also several months old, so they could have added signage since this was created.
And I had a second question. A while back when we did the site plan review, isn't this building looking very different than what we approved?
I could look that up for you, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Almost like a separate building connected by a walkway?
Well, the white area of the building has always been out from the tower.
But there was always, I thought it was like a separate building. Does anybody remember on that? When we did the site plan review, it looked very different from this.
I can send that information to you.
That's fine. I just didn't know if you remembered or not, and if it did have 2 rows of signage on that new part of the building. You don't know for sure?
I don't know for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Robinson, then Mr. Kange.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's really almost not about this ordinance. It's about the application of signs, along the lines of what they're trying to do in a more permanent manner. I mean, I actually look at the upper part, and frankly, I prefer it to the clutter that you often get along the streets. I think it's kind of cool looking. Have you looked into whether there's other communities that have sign codes that are, kind of going in a different direction than the boring old post signs that we put out along our roadways?
Through the chair, Mr. Robinson, no, I have not.
But your staff's view is that it's just having this amount of advertisement in a temporary manner is an unfair business advantage. That's the position?
That's our main position. Additionally, this, not in the Diamond Center, but in another situation, you could have a residential, you could have residential areas in your upper portion, and then those people, if they're renting, they may not have any say about whether there's a sign covering their window.
Okay.
That's how I read it.
Yeah, I have a feeling someone cares about having tenants more than signs at some point, but okay, thanks.
Mr. Kange?
Thank you, through the chair. My question's with regard to this unequal treatment of tenants. If I'm a owner of a commercial building and I have a tenant who wants to pay for space on a monument sign, and I have another tenant who doesn't, which might be the case with H&M and wanting to advertise on the tower of Diamond Center Hotel, you're saying that our code is 60 days for this temporary? And you don't support the 90 days?
90 days.
Our code is 90.
That's what the proposed amendment says.
And right now we have 0 days
For
because of this fair and unequal treatment.
This allows a new retail facility to have a very, very, very large sign that existing retail facilities do not have an opportunity to have. And this allows buildings under construction to do advertising that established facilities don't get to do. That's the kind of unequal treatment that I think is, that we've determined is not, in our opinion, is not fair.
Okay.
Mr. Robinson, what would you feel if you looked at this exterior and the unit next to it had a great big REI sign, and you look on the end and it had a Starbucks sign next to a McDonald's sign?
I'd feel like it's an improvement over Muldoon Road is what I would feel like.
Well put. Thank you very much. I have built in cities where my windows had to be concealed during construction. And I think the advertisement is an improvement over some of it. I understand the objection to using the term new when it's not defined. I mean, I could define new as within 180 days of obtaining your CO or your CCO, and that at least gives us a defined period of time. But I don't know what we do with the advertising signs. I mean, I could go either way. I see these as an improvement over just the 2 mil visqueen we put over them and leave them up there for a year at times. That doesn't help. Mr. Spring and Ms. Dean.
Yeah, this is related to the issue about advertising off the premises. I think you mentioned in the last paragraph. And in the picture, the rendering, that big H&M is not located on the site or the location of the new retail store, is it?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, the retail store is in the white portion at the bottom. So they're on the same lot and they're on the same building, but the red portion is not. There's different uses behind that red portion.
The current sign ordinance prohibits that type of advertising off-premise, or is that considered within the scope of the sign ordinance to have the H&M up there above the store level?
The current code would limit it to 50%. Well,
I mean, it's not,
yeah,
not
they wouldn't
on-premise.
they wouldn't be able to put it up there.
They would be able to put it up there under the sign ordinance? Okay. Because it's on the same lot, commercial lot, as the business?
No, I think they are on the same lot.
Yes, I mean, that's what I meant. I mean,
Yeah.
since they're on the same lot, it would be permitted then, assuming that we adopt this. And we aren't changing other parts of the ordinance to allow signage off-premise or anything because of this?
Correct.
Okay.
Do we define premise?
No.
Okay. Good question. Good question, Mr. Spring. Ms. Dean, then Mr. Kange.
I found the original application from H&M from last year, and I withdraw my comment. That is very close to what they originally asked for, so there is no issue.
Mr. Kange.
Thank you again. Sorry. With regard to Section 1, H1, and C, are these two different banners than what we're striking? I mean, I don't want to see, particularly at somewhere like the Diamond Center, this proposed 3A where window applications can be affixed for up to 50% of the total over. That's a lot of area in the Diamond Center. I'll give you that. But could they? I mean, it's not clearly defined in 1C where it says the banner is displayed for no more than 30 consecutive. What's the difference between a banner here and window applications other than this 50%? Is there any size restriction currently? Doesn't look like it. Just reading H1, A, B, and C. So I'm curious, when we add this 3A here, we're limiting it to 50% as opposed to A1, A through C. What's the difference between a banner and a window treatment?
Through the chair, Mr. Kange, we do have a definition of a banner sign, which is a sign made of lightweight fabric or similar material with no enclosing framework that is mounted to a building or other structure at one or more edges. And I would have to check to see whether there's more restrictions on, like size restrictions on banners. I'm not entirely sure. I think it could. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Kange. We have no further questions for staff. I will read the public hearing. The procedure by which the public may speak to the Commission at its meeting is, after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the Chair will ask for public testimony on this issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission's rules of procedures. A, petitioners, including all his or her representatives, 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. B, representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., 5 minutes. Individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. I will now open the public hearing on case 2015-0059, an amendment to the Anchorage Municipal Code relating to window signs. Public hearing is now open. If you wish to testify, come up to the mic, state your name.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, my name is Tim Potter with Dowell. At first glance, when you see the one example...
Potter, are you testifying as an individual, as a representative, or...
As an individual.
Thank you very much.
Someone who got to sit through the several wars of the sign ordinance. Cautionary note. Great picture. I mean, it's a great example. Unfortunately, that may not be what you get the next time. So number 2 in the door might be a horrendous application of this ordinance. Also, in the ability to put 50% of the windows into kind of temporary signage, and that I would caution you that without some more specific detailed criteria and standards, that it would be very easy to make it look like a carnival just came to town. And that's my cautionary note. I don't think that there's adequate standards associated with this and criteria. There are some applications that would be pretty cool. Outside of Alaska, they're doing some very interesting things with photographs and images, either on film and or in perforations, in metal perforations that is an exterior material. So it ends up looking just like a pixelated photo of something. So it might be nice to cover that in some fashion, but I don't think this proposed language does justice to the work that was done in the past, as well as I think it opens us up for number 2 to be a carnival coming to town. So that's my comments.
Mr. Kange?
Thank you, Mr. Potter. One question. What if you limit it to, and I don't know what the percentage is, but some percentage of the occupied retail space where they could, in this case, right, H&M all over whatever they're occupying as opposed to the entire structure. That's what gives me a little bit of rub when you're talking about the entire structure. As opposed to just if H&M or whoever it is, whatever the tenant space is taking up, if they want to do some sort of temporary advertisement for a given period of time, what's your thoughts on that?
And what could that temporary advertising be made out of? Is that a blue tarp with the name painted on it?
Right.
That's what I'm trying to get away from. I mean, we had a pretty good ordinance, and then we allowed car dealerships to come back in with balloons and ticker tape flags and crap. So, I think this is going without some additional criteria and specifics. It's going in the wrong direction. It's going in the direction of one example, which is a good example. I agree. Very tastefully done. Looks great. Much better than Muldoon Road. But I think that you kind of lose your perspective by looking at this specific example. And without some additional things being done, I think it just opens up the door, and we need to look at this a little bit closer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Potter.
Thanks.
Hey, good evening. My name's Seth Weaver. I do tenant coordination for the Diamond Center, and I'd like to explain this to you.
Speaking on behalf of Diamond Center?
Yes, ma'am, or yes, sir.
Okay, you get 10 minutes.
10 minutes, all right. So we're, excuse me?
Wait a minute. Okay. Ms. McConnell, they wouldn't be the petitioner, because the petitioner is the assembly.
Correct.
So he is a representative of a group and would be 5 minutes.
I wouldn't think so.
I can be brief.
3.
3 is an individual. Okay, you get 3 minutes.
Sure.
Go ahead, sir.
So we're going through a lot of changes, and we're doing a lot of upgrades, and we have a lot of new tenants. And so I'd like to explain this a little clearer because I think it's become a little conflated. There's 2 corresponding issues that the staff has conflated into one. If you look on your rendering there is the tower portion is covered with a vinyl graphic. It is a little bit different than the one depicted here in front of you. But the graphic on the bottom portion, which the staff explained very well, is the portion of the H&M store. So if we focus just on the portion of the H&M store on the bottom, that's where this ordinance, proposed ordinance, is really specifically tailored to. It has nothing to do with the H&M on the tower, because currently 21.11.070H3 allows this vinyl to be installed because it does not encompass more than 50% of the entire structure, like Mr. Robinson and Mr. Kange was saying earlier. So if we focus again on the very bottom portion of the H&M store, we're merely trying to obscure or obstruct the public from visually peering into the construction site. I've read through the staff comments, and the staff, quite frankly, didn't provide an adequate solution to the problem. We're trying to have an aesthetically pleasing display to the public. And would you guys prefer us to use a black or a vinyl or a white barricade. I mean, I just don't know what else to do. So we, or Diamond Center and the tenant, thought that this application was the most appropriate, given the resources that we had at hand. So again, we're not trying to advertise, or the tenant's not trying to advertise. The advertising came merely as a consequence of the vinyl itself. So this is a really cut and dry, simple amendment change that Ms. Johnson and I have collaborated on, and we think it's the most appropriate solution to fix the code.
Thank you. Would you state your last name and spell it again?
Weaver, W-E-A-V-E-R.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, then Mr. Spring.
Thank you. Through the chair, it's currently applied on the windows right now.
The first and second floor, correct.
How long has it been up there?
It's been up there 2 months. It'll come down on the 15th of July.
So 90 days is enough for obscuring TI to that degree?
We're just trying to merely put the vinyl on there for the duration of the construction. We're not trying to, or the tenant is not trying to extend the period for a year or 10 years, because that would obscure the windows.
You said you have it on the upper windows as well?
Just the first and second floor. This rendering does not depict the second floor coverings.
So wouldn't that not be in compliance with the 50% rule?
What's that? This portion, right? The first and second floor?
Yeah.
Technically, it would not be in compliance, correct, and that's why we proposed this amendment change.
No. I'm just trying to understand. If you actually covered the first and second floor,
sure,
then you would not be in compliance with this proposed amendment change, as I read it.
Of the H&M store?
Yeah.
Correct. That's why we proposed this amendment.
And then you would concede that you would not do the upper floor windows, or if you had other ground floor space in the Diamond Center, you would only do every other window or something along those lines.
Incorrect. The portion of the tower that's covered in vinyl is currently legal under code.
Because it's under construction, 100% of it can be covered.
Under 21.11.070H3, it technically allows 50%, no more than 50% of the entire structure of the windows to be covered. So this is about 20% of the tower, so it's legal.
I see. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Spring, then Ms. McConnell.
Could you clarify the purpose of 3A? I understand the construction issue. You want to cover the windows, so
correct.
You need something to cover the full lay so you can't look in.
Yes.
What's the purpose of the A section underneath there?
Of the what section?
3A, the section, the last section of the
3A.
Window applications can be fixed up to 50% of the total overall window square footage of the entire structure on a temporary basis for no more than 90 days when advertising new retail facilities. So I don't understand what the purpose of that is.
That's the section of the code that we're amending.
Well, you're amending the code to allow 100% of the window to be covered when it's under construction. Mm-hmm. And that's what you asked for. You just said it's under construction, so we want to cover it and prevent. What's the purpose of doing that after having 50% of the total window coverage after construction for new facility?
We were just being liberal in our 90 days. We were just trying to encompass everything that we could in this code amendment.
But that, I mean,
Mr.
so
Spring,
what?
can I help maybe?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Paragraph 3 is talking about when it's under construction. Paragraph 3A is talking about 90 days after the construction is done and when it's open. So for 90 days after it's open, when advertising new retail facilities.
Thank you for the clarification. But isn't that already covered under 3? Because it says the total combined area of poster advertisement and other window applications shall not exceed 50% of the window area. So
you're correct.
After retail construction and it's open, it's already allowed. It's redundant, isn't it?
You're correct. It is redundant. You're correct.
So why add it?
That is unnecessary.
Okay.
Ms. McConnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could clarify the staff's interpretation of the last sentence in 3, the total combined area of poster advertisement and other window applications shall not exceed 50% of the window area. That has always been interpreted to mean each window, not total windows added together. So that's why I assume 3A was put in.
All right, do we have any other questions for this speaker? Seeing none, thank you very much for your
Can
testimony.
I add one thing, or is my time up?
Be brief.
Well, I was just going to say that, like Mr. Potter was saying earlier, this is actually being done in other large cities, and I think the city should look into how other municipalities cover their windows for construction barricades, because this is in line. It is not an anomaly in the construction and advertising industry in cities like New York or San Francisco or LA or Seattle. All large retail mixed-use establishments follow this similar sort of procedure to shield the public from construction before the time the store is open.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Do we have anyone else who wishes to testify? Anyone else? Going once, going twice, going three. I now close the public testimony on case 2015-0059. Do we have any further questions for staff? I've got two questions for staff if we go. Mr. Kanes and Mr. Spring.
Thank you. Through the chair. I'm just curious, again, let me just premise this with my thought on this. I own some commercial buildings, and they're in Phoenix, Arizona, and we've got quite a bit of vacant space. And we do the same sort of thing. We cover this with this 3M film that you can't see either the TIs or the vacant space, and it picks people shopping or doing whatever they're doing, similar to what the H&M is. I'm curious if we can, and I'm in support of that, but I also listened to Mr. Potter's testimony and the way I read this of what a banner is or what a window application is. And I would be in favor of supporting something like this because I do think it brings some value and aesthetics to a particular project. I would like to see, more definition or defined on what can be there. Is it an opaque 3M type film? Is it a, whatever it is? Let's define window application a bit better, and let's define banner. Is that something that the staff could get on board for in this particular case or in future cases?
Through the chair, Mr. Kange, I'm always in favor of better definitions and more clarity. I'm not yet comfortable speaking, having an opinion on your proposal, but except to say that, yeah, more definition is good.
I mean, in this case, again, we've kind of got the cart before the horse here. H&M is about to open up in a couple of weeks. We're, it's 90 days behind here. I mean, what do you don't pass this tonight and you tell them to take their stuff down? I don't know. I'm kind of in a catch-22 here, but I would like to see better definition of banner and window application going forward, and I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Spring?
Yeah, just to clarify, in reading this section 3A again, it seems like it's more than just being redundant. It's actually restricting the use of banners and window applications to only 90 days after a new one. So it actually eliminates posters and window applications, doesn't it? After 90 days, you would not be allowed to have a poster or window application.
Until your retail facility becomes old.
Yeah. So that kind of, thank you for the clarification, is not well written. It seems like that's going to cause an immense amount of problems.
Well, and again, Mr. Spring, I think it does expand the way the code has been interpreted to combine window area rather than to apply it per each window, which is how it has been applied in the past. 50% of each window rather than 50% of the total combined window area.
Of the entire structure, yeah. But, so the original language would not allow 50% of the window area, a window area. Okay. Thank you.
Are you done, Mr. Spring? Mr. Voorhees?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, comment is through testimony. I believe that we do need a little bit more control on the window coverings. You know, I think that if this is a step in the right direction, I think currently what we do right now in the construction sites is put up some kind of black visqueen and put up your job markers. So I do believe that this is the right direction. I think maybe a step would be to go away from banners and posters and things like that, but things that are actually affixed to the window, like an application, might be something that I would believe would give a little more control and give some definition.
Are you done, Mr. Voorhees?
Yes, Sam. Thank you.
Okay. I'm concerned with the use of the words premise and entire structure as used on Diamond Center. To me, we should limit it to the retail space that's leased. I mean, if this were a single building, a Safeway, owned by one tenant, you know, then it would make a little more sense. But just because it's part of Diamond Center, do they get 50% of that entire Diamond Center would be a huge sign. And so I'm concerned that we need to clarify premise and entire structure on something like that. If we take no action tonight, this started due to a complaint. What happens to that complaint?
Mr. Chair, I could double check, but it's my understanding that the complaint case has been closed pending an ordinance, pending this ordinance.
Yeah. Okay, and my third point is, from somebody who worked on the other side of the visqueen many, many years, we look at the visqueen to protect the construction workers on the inside from the public on the outside on that. What is the wish of the body on case 2015-0059? Mr. Kane, Mr. Robinson.
In the matter of case 2015-0059, amendment to Anchorage Municipal Code 2111-070 related to window signs for buildings under construction and temporary window applications. I move that we recommend approval to the Assembly.
Mr. Keynes, you have seconded that. Do you care to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would, but in the findings, I would like to change some of this, or make some suggested edits to this change. And again, because I wouldn't want to see a sign 50% of the size of the Diamond Center Tower. I agree with your comment, and I think 3A should read something. Window applications can be affixed to up to 50% of the total overall window square footage of the occupied retail space or leased retail space, something that confines it to where that tenant is going to be located. And I'm even okay with saying if you're a tenant and you want to do this on 100% of your windows of your actual retail space while you're under construction, I'm okay with that. So I would vote for approval, but I would like to amend this a little bit before we recommend it to the Assembly.
And if I can speak to my motion, I would also vote to support the motion if we can have some clarifying language. So I'm open to that amendment.
Occupied retail doesn't get me there because that still could be interpreted by somebody as being the entire Diamond Center because it's all mostly occupied retail space.
Mr. Chair, I would defer to one of our commercial brokers on the commission for that language. But again, I'm with Mr. Robinson also. I would like to see some better definition on window application, and unfortunately I don't know exactly what these things are made out of. We use some opaque 3M film in some of our locations in Arizona, but again, I would defer to maybe staff and others that may have a little more experience in that than I to come up with that language.
Mr. Voorhees, then Ms. Dean, and then Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I guess for Commissioner change, you could just say up to 100% of the leased retail area. You know, I mean, that would pretty much get you their least occupied area by the tenant.
Are you done, Mr. Sporhees?
I am, thank you.
Ms. Dean?
I have a question for the commission in general on this. What if it's a tenant that's in the interior of the building and doesn't have windows? What do you do then? How does that apply? Do you look at it and say, well, you've got 1,000 square feet rented, and that's how it applies to the use of the windows on the exterior of the building? Like Northway Mall, there's lots of interior tenants that don't have any exterior wall space. H&M is easier to diagnose in this because they have a lot of exterior wall space because of their lease area. So just curious what you guys think.
I would think that in the interior of something like Northway Mall or on an infill space like that, you could cover your windows the same way if you wanted, although it would be affected by code because you can't see it from the street or any other a car or whatever, right? So, and I've seen it used in the mall, Fifth Avenue Mall, when a new store is going up, they'll advertise with their, whether it was Foot Locker, whoever it was, right? And I think the big rub here is that it's not so much the retail space on the bottom, we're looking at this huge banner. And to Mr. Potter's point is, how do you define that? Is it a big blue tarp with spray painted letters on it that says H&M? I mean, clearly this is of much higher quality, but I kind of agree with you. Where do you draw the line? And that's why I was asking for a bit more definition in all this.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Robinson. Mr. Spring?
Yeah, I don't think we dealt with the issue of 3A, the entire building. I'm happy with the language that I heard about regarding the window treatment. The window treatment, which is just the window in the occupied area, leased area. But with respect to the entire structure, the 50% is another issue. And the motion was to recommend approval of that. So if we don't deal with that, then we're going to be recommending that these large signs that I agree with Mr. Potter could be abused. I'm not so concerned about covering the workspace, when they're totally with some type of advertisement or, something attractive. But the allowing such a huge sign, which is so overblown, over any other type of sign we allow in the sign ordinance, just doesn't. It's an equity issue, as staff pointed out. And for 90 days to allow that, I don't know. Maybe it would be okay to allow that during construction, maybe, but even that I'm not so sure about. So I guess I'd like to consider an amendment that would recommend deletion of that section.
You're talking specifically which section, Mr. Spring?
3A.
Okay. Is that a motion you just made?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Spring to delete 3A. Do we have a second? We have a second from Mr. Sporhees. Do you care to speak to your motion, Mr. Springer?
Well, I don't know if this will be abused in too many cases, but there are some pretty big retail facilities around town that this would apply to. There's opportunities to advertise your business. Let's take the case of a new business that's just opening up. That wouldn't necessarily require big signs on the facade of the building. Like in Northway Mall, the example, when Burlington Coat Factory, God forbid I ever went in there, and opened up a store. They have the right in the sign ordinance to put up a sign on the property, anywhere on the property, announcing the opening of that store. And they put that sign up on the corner of Penland Park and Airport Heights, and that's probably more effective than putting a banner up on the street. So, they can do the same thing. They're allowed to put temporary sign up on the lot that meets the sign ordinance, advertising the new opening of this retail store. So I don't think this is necessary to add this paragraph.
Mr. Robinson?
How does deleting A limit it to the leased portion of a new retail facility?
Well, that's the problem. It doesn't. No, it allows it on the entire building, 50% of the entire structure.
But why are you proposing to delete Section A?
Because I don't think it's necessary for the advertisement of a new retail facility.
Are you proposing to limit to just the portion that is being leased? And if so, how does this accomplish that?
Well, this apparently is a new section that's going to expand the sign ordinance to allow, and this is maybe a little area of confusion for me, so if staff finds that I am off base here, is a new section that's going to permit new signage on an entire structure up to 50% of the total overall window square footage, which isn't currently allowed. So it's a new section expanding the sign code, which is contradicted by the testifier.
So your
who said
point
that
is,
this H&M sign was allowed. It was okay because it didn't meet, it wasn't 50% of the signage. Well, I think according to this, it appears that that H&M sign on the upper story probably isn't allowed under the current zoning sign code.
and so the only distinction is you're allowing up to 100% if under construction, and that's what we've done.
100% of the retail area that's being occupied. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Suarez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I requested to speak kind of while we were going through that. I kind of think this is and everything else, kind of in maybe a project-specific point. So I think that 3A, eliminating 3A for a new retailer downtown, I don't think I'm speaking out of school. North Face is going to occupy 2 out of 3 stories in a building downtown. And this, by limiting 3A, they would only be able to advertise on the 2 stories, the first story and the second story, and not affect the third story tenants. Correct, Mr. Spring? Is that?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. McConnell?
I'd just like to note that what you guys have been saying about building signs, or I'm sorry, about window signs is correct, but building signs are allowed on areas of the building that aren't necessarily the exact location of the tenant. So when you have a multi-story building, like 188 West Northern Lights has a Verizon sign all the way at the top, but I don't think Verizon occupies the top floor. So there are opportunities for building signs to address, to allow visibility, advertisement in a location that may be read from farther away. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Spring, your motion was simply to delete paragraph 3A. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
We have no further discussion, so let's vote on Mr. Spring's motion, which is to delete paragraph 3A. I need more votes. That motion has passed. Mr. Spinelli, you got to vote. You're not allowed to vote. Okay, are you voting yes or no? I'll vote yes. Okay. Let the record show Mr. Spinelli voted yes. The motion carried 7-1 on that. Okay, now, that gets us back to Mr. Robinson's motion, which was to adopt the motion as submitted. Do we have any further discussion on that portion of the motion? Let's use our machines.
Can we?
Well, okay.
So, Tyler, Commissioner Robinson's motion was to approve as submitted.
Well, so the motion on the table is as amended now that we've passed that motion to delete 3A.
Mr. Spring.
So the new language regarding limiting to the lease or occupied area is not included in the motion?
was in 3A, and you deleted 3A, so it went.
No, I thought the language was to clarify the total combined area of poster advertising and other window applications shall not exceed 50% of the window area of the leased or occupied area under 3. I'm sorry, I was...
Mr. Chair, so all we've done is we had a main motion which was as written. We then passed a motion deleting 3A. That's all we've done to date. If there's another motion, could we please make it quickly and move on one way or the other?
I'm apparently the only one that thought that was the recommended change, so I'm fine. Don't worry about it. It's good.
Okay, can you please use your machines then? That motion has passed.
I would simply say, as a finding, Mr. Chair, that clearly our muddling through this is an indicator that there's an issue that is not well thought out. Standards are not, fully expressed, and to sort of accommodate maybe new technologies or methodologies, and we urge staff to dip into that shallow kitty and find more resources and dig into it, lest we have other issues come up, both opportunistic and perhaps ones that we don't want.
Thank you very much. Mr. Spinelli, you are recused, so you get to go home. Something unfair about that. The next case before us is case 2014-0195, American Landscaping and Spinelli Homes. On that, do we have a staff report, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This is a conditional use to allow a natural resource extraction.
One minute. Whoa. Mr. Spinelli, are you here on the 20th? Yes. You are? Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you. Go ahead, staff, please. Thank you.
This is a case to allow a conditional use to allow a natural resource extraction. Peat extraction requires a conditional use approval in the R3 and R4 zoning districts. The petitioner's narrative states the excavation and processing is an interim use of the property and describes the project as processing of the existing peat and organic material on Lot 3 and the southern portion of Tract A into planting soil. The screening plant will be set up for processing materials on Tract A. Peat will also be brought in from other sites for processing. The materials will be run through the screening plant, mixed with imported sand and other soil constituents, and loaded onto trucks for delivery to purchasers on an as-needed basis. Once the extraction activities are complete, future residential development is planned. The narrative notes that access will be via 2 existing driveways at the north on Boundary Avenue. Access to Lot 3 and the southern portion of Tract A will be along Newell Street, Whisperwood Park Drive, and Shagalek Street. Today I spoke with the petitioner, and he submitted what you have before you. It's an updated as of July 3rd, 2015. It's the natural resource extraction plan, and then there is also a planting plan. And that, given the, after he saw the staff report, he developed this plan showing no access onto Boundary Avenue, and instead the access is out to Newell Street. Staff hasn't had an opportunity to review this as it just came in, and more importantly, the reviewing agencies have not seen it at all, this new proposal for access. The Planning Division has some hesitancy about the petitioner's request to operate the excavation and peat processing plant from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 days a week, given that the site borders residential areas on 3 sides and dump trucks will be rumbling down the surrounding streets. Limiting the days and hours of operation appears reasonable. Review comments from DHHS recommends that the conditional use permit be limited to 3 years to ascertain the efficacy of the noise control measures. The division recommends that if excavation and processing activities are not completed within 3 years, the petitioner should apply for a public hearing time extension. While time extensions are usually processed without a public hearing, staff recommends a public hearing in order to provide opportunity for impacted neighbors to comment. There were also a number of plans that weren't submitted, and those are outlined in the conditions information that is still needed. I believe that's all I have. Oh, I did want to point out that on page 17, the aerial photograph, this is aerial photography from 2012, and there's been a great deal of residential development in the intervening years, where you see Ophir Drive and Squitna Drive, just south of Whisperwood Park Drive. Most of that is developed.
Does that complete your staff report?
It does.
Mr. Strike, then Mr. Kange.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. Through the staff, on page 5, you identify 5 points. Possibly one of the first point of the items that have been requested, but despite repeated requests, have not been provided. Are these still all open items, or has one of those been closed as a result of this submission?
I believe they're all still outstanding.
Has the petitioner given any reason why these are still open after repeated requests?
No, we don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Are you done, Mr. Strike? Mr. Kange?
Thank you. Through the chair, I noticed that on page 3 we talk about one community meeting. Were there notices properly posted of public hearing and the ability to testify in this case? I didn't read any on that.
You mean for the community meeting that the petitioner organizes on their own?
Or notice of public hearing for tonight's?
Oh, yes, that was done, and signs were posted on the site.
Were notices mailed out to residents?
Yes, they were.
Any comment? I know this is just new, but any comments?
No, we didn't receive any comment back.
When were the signs posted of public notice?
They were posted twice because this case was supposed to be heard in January, so signs were put up at that point. There was one sign put up, one sign that I saw, and then more signs were put up. It was 21 days before the deadline.
So the community council had an opportunity to weigh in on this?
They
as
did.
did members of the public?
Yes.
And it's my understanding from your testimony or your statement that there's been no comments from the community council or the public.
That's correct.
Thank you, ma'am.
Are you done, Mr. Kange? Mr. Spring?
Yes, the new site plan without access to boundary is an issue for me, I think. And I know that there's a plat note that prohibits access from this track A. And it sounds like DOT is saying, you got to remove that plat note. Any idea whether that would be difficult or they would be opposed to it? I mean, I see the statement from DOT saying that it's not allowed, but I don't see any description or discussion about why is it bad. I mean, it's a two-way street, I believe, and there's no direct housing that abuts it. And the alternative, of course, is to go down to Katna, down to Newell Street, and commission members who have been here more than a month or so will realize that we didn't accommodate the right-of-way for Camelot Street, so they can't go down Camelot, so they got to go down to 4th Avenue on Newell Street. And you look at the map on page 17, you'll see, gosh, there's a bunch of residential lots there that abut 4th Avenue, and have driveways on Fourth Avenue that are going to have to go and maneuver around how many trucks a day is that going to be?
Quite a few.
So that's not acceptable. I mean, that's not an acceptable circulation plan for this.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, yes, in speaking to Mr. Jonglin from DOT, he indicated that they would be amenable to looking at that per their caveats that per the letter sent on December 22nd, 2014, which is in your packet, will support removal of this plat note if all internal and side street access connections are preserved. And he goes on to say in his letter on December 22nd that having internal and side street access is critical to a successful transportation network. And when staff was reviewing this, and I think when other reviewers were looking at it also, we were doing it on the assumption that they would take access from Boundary Avenue, and it wouldn't, strictly be restricted to Newell Avenue, which would put a lot of trucks on that particular street. And we thought, like DOT, assumed that the truck traffic would be more spread out.
Go ahead.
Please. But ultimately, you can remove the plat note through
Yes.
platting action, but DOT would have to grant driveway access.
Right. But as I said, they appear amenable to that. That's for the processing and extraction section of this. He stressed that once it's slated for residential development, they would have to then take another look at it based on, the number of houses and that sort of thing.
Well, that's interesting. Although the same problem, but and terrible. Since we don't have Camelot, it's going to be a problem. But.
Are you done, Mr. Spring? Mr. Spring, are you done? Ms. Dean, then Mr. Robinson.
Through the chair, I have a question regarding notices that were sent out. I know that in the old Title 21, only the property owners were notified. I knew the new Title 21, the tenants are notified. In this particular case, which way did it go? Were the tenants notified? I'm guessing that the majority of the neighbors were tenants and not owners, is what I'm getting at.
All I know is that I couldn't tell you. I have a list of names and addresses that notices were sent to. Whether those were tenants or owners, I couldn't tell you.
So we haven't totally transitioned over to notifying tenants through notices, or?
Through the chair, Ms. Dean, under the new code, both property owners and residents are notified.
So it has changed over.
When the new code is used, that's how we process it. When the old code is used, we only notify residents.
Which code is this under?
It doesn't say.
This is under the new code.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now, we've been pretty good, but we need to have that on the cover sheet. So this is under the new code. Thank you very much. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. Following up on the issue of boundary, so we have a recommendation for approval contingent on a plat note being removed, which of course requires a platting action. And we're not sure whether, we're not really discussing here why the plat note was there in the first place, so that's really going to be my first question. The second question is then, following the expiration of the peat removal, are we then suggesting that the plat note get added back, if in fact that's the question?
No, I think DOT, once they agree to take it off, that's going to be, it'll be off at that point. But I think DOT is going to want to see additional information of how the developer intends to develop that site for housing.
Thank you.
My question's on boundary also. This property cannot access boundary to exit. But now they accessing onto Newell Street. Is Newell Street two-way?
Newell Street is not really even developed. It's not anything more than a beat-up asphalt road that goes partway down that lot. It doesn't connect to anything. It's a dead-end road.
Okay, do we know if they're going to use Newell Street to exit to Boundary?
I believe, yeah, that's the only thing. I believe so.
Okay, now, if they use Newell Street to exit to Boundary, is that in violation of the plat note?
No, because it just pertains to that particular tract.
Okay, because that's what, the way I interpret it is if they're using Newell, the plat note doesn't apply, and they could go to Boundary.
True.
And so they wouldn't be going all the way down to Camelot or anything else. They'd be coming out to Newell, making a right. When the applicant speaks, I think we will be asking that question also on that. Do we have anything else further from staff? Anything else further from commissioners? Okay. If I can find my note, we will open the public hearing on this case. I read it earlier. The petitioner gets 10 minutes, and that's for you and all your team. And then any individuals, and I don't see any individuals except maybe Mr. Potter, but you guys get 10 minutes to divide up as you see fit. Would you please state your name for the record and spell it?
Thank you. My name is Tom Dreyer, spelled D-R-E-Y-E-R.
Thank you.
Like the ice cream. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, planning staff, I represent the petitioner tonight, Spinell Homes and American Landscaping. With me tonight, I have Dave Grenier, the civil engineer on the project, with Triad Engineering, Peter Briggs, with a landscape architect with Corvus Design, and Glenn Ball of American Landscaping, the owner of American Landscaping. And this is being processed through the new code. I'd like to thank staff for their diligent work in this application, and we can concur with most of the conditions. I'd like to propose just some minor changes. On page 11, on item number 2A, put at the end as updated by the 7/3/15 plan, and the same with item number 2B at the end, add as updated 7/3/15. And on condition number 11, I propose to leave the text alone, except at the end, add in, or obtain a driveway permit from the MOA for access to Newell Street, as shown on the plans. Item number 13, to amend the 8-foot tall chain link fence to a 6-foot tall, and I think staff was fine with that. And then on item number 15, erase for areas adjacent to residential zone, and just replace that with as shown on the landscaping plan. The update we made is actually very minor. All we did is, since there was an issue going north on the two access points that probably have grandfather rights, and if we wanted to spend 2 years in attorney fees and whatnot, we could probably access there, but no one wants to do that. So all we did is just rotated it, the access 90 degrees to the west, and we accessed Newell Street, which accesses Boundary. Our access point is only 100 feet south of the edge of Boundary, so there's really no effect on Newell Street. That first 100 feet is actually an improved area. When you get further south from there, it is kind of a mess and it's not built. And I'm not sure why Camelot Drive was coming in, because that's not built or anything. It has nothing to do with this application here. So we feel this change was very minor. We just got this last Monday, and we presented the change on Wednesday. Normally in this process, when the staff gets something that might affect us drastically, which this one obviously does, because as you all know, you can't just change a plat note. A plat note would knock this project out complete another year. Another item to keep in mind is that, say, if you voted this down and we didn't get a permit, really nothing's going to change because all that peat is still going to come out. It's still all going to be excavated and probably come out exactly where we're shown on Newell Street and then connected into Boundary, just through the normal subdivision process. But the only reason we need the permit, the conditional use permit, is because the end product is going to be improved, mixed, and sold. The other option is to take all the peat that's in this development and just truck it up to the dump and fill up the dump up in Eagle River. So that just doesn't really make any sense. I'd like to address the issue of the community meeting. That was done strictly to code, to new code. It cost us a lot of money, and planning staff, Erica, even helped us with it and worked with my front desk person. We sent out over, I think it was over 900 or 1,000 notices on the correct date. And it was, according to the new code, where you have to submit it to all the homeowners and also the tenants. All of the items that you're looking at in that list on page, where it talks about the meeting, have been documented. I have a bunch of sheets here. And I'm a little surprised by this coming up because it took a lot to make that community meeting. We had to make that community meeting because the community councils don't meet during the summer. We'd have much rather have gone just a community council meeting. All of the items that are on page 5 that are also listed on condition number 7 on page 12 of your packet. 7A, we have the calculations. 7B is on the landscape plan. 7C, the existing proposed contours for the southern half of the site are all on the grading plan on page 53. Granted, I didn't copy very well. D is per the test logs on lot 3 in the lower half of tract A that's in your packet. They're showing the overburden is peat, and that any unusable material debris will be disposed of off-site at an approved location. And G, the waste disposal plan, we're not even sure. There's no waste. We're not having any outhouses in there. And G is the one about the community meeting, which we have every single aspect of that complied with. And I forgot to reserve any time.
Okay, you got 3 minutes on that. Ms. Dean, then Mr. Strzok.
I guess I'll stop there and go ahead and start taking
I
questions.
thought you were done. I'm sorry.
No, I'm done. I'll go ahead and reserve the remaining time. Thank you.
Okay, I thought that's what you asked me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. You have 3 minutes, Ms. Dean.
Through the chair, I just had a few questions regarding the requirements from the city, the recommendations. They talk about the noise study and mitigation by the Department of Health and Human Services. What do you guys want to do on that? What's your plan? I'm really curious.
Dave, you want to take that?
Because that's a tough one. I know sometimes we get stuff that comes through and they want to have metering and things like that to check.
Well, we are concerned about that because of the time involved with that. And I think Mr. Glenn Ball could speak to that too on the problems that he hasn't had with his other sites around town with the same kind of operation. It's just not that noisy of an operation. And as you can tell here, we're adding in a 8-foot-tall sound berm. We got a 6-foot-tall fence. We're 400 or 500 feet away from any of the residences.
And my next question was regarding the SWEPS plan. I mean, some of the SWEPS these days are just amazing.
Correct, and we will provide a SWEP. That's kind of part of our
Yeah,
operation.
You have to. The EPA makes you, so it's not, it's not an option. I know that. So I guess you're going to have to do a SWEP then for the full time it's in operation, all the years. You're going to have somebody there every week or every 2 weeks. They're going to have to monitor everything to make sure there's no dust or anything going onto the roads. You're going to have it runoff, and all those things have to be monitored.
Correct. There's a lot of regulations, and our SWEPs are usually about this thick.
Yes.
And they're very strict in that you
And then
do everything correctly.
the last thing is that the city also mentions here that they want a more specific estimate of the quantity of material. When you're digging, sometimes you find pockets of stuff. It could be quite a bit deeper in areas than you anticipate. It could be shallower, too. Hopefully it's shallower, right? But,
That's very true. It's going to change depending on how deep we need to go, because the engineer will be there on site saying, okay, well, you need to dig another 3 feet deeper because of dirt such and such. And so we did submit, though, the final contours of that site and then also the excavations that would probably happen. So there was an estimate. And it's not going to be exact until we're there and it's being built.
Cord the whole entire place, you would have really not a great, okay.
Yeah, and we know about what it is because there has been some testing there, but you can't.
All those things are dealt with then.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And I would also just clarify that in order for us to get a driveway permit access onto Newell there is nothing. It's not that big of a deal. Probably take a day. It's just one little form you fill out.
Are you done, Ms. Dean? Mr. Strike?
First off, I applaud you. This is the way we're going to have to develop land in the Anchorage Bowl. We're going to have to take these steps and so forth. So we have to find ways, I believe, and this is a statement, we have to find ways for developers to be able to develop this land in this type of fashion. And so I applaud you for pursuing this. With it comes issues that come out there. And so you kind of casually passed off, we're not going to have outhouses out there. Well, I think you are going to have one. You're going to have a porta-can out there. It's a construction site. The code's going to require you to have one. The workers aren't going to just go and take a dump out there in the overburden.
True, yeah.
The law says you're going to end up having one. So, and I believe that your petitioner has, and his other sites, does have.
Okay, I might have overspoke on that one, sorry.
And I will tell you, it is a noisy operation, and his sites have had noise complaints. And they've had to have noise studies, and they've gone out there and measured the noise and so forth. Now, granted, this is a much larger area, so I think, I think it's easily overcome. These sites also have a lot of issues with tracking of the mud and debris as a result of trucks in and out and
Right.
rumble barriers that we have to go across and so forth. But one of the items I didn't see here is everything's cut, haul away, process, haul away, bringing in new peat in. What are we left with? A hole at the end of the day? Are we going to have any fill? Are we going to be accepting fill at this site? What's the plan?
Well, the plan is, as shown in that one drawing, I think it's page 53, is to leave it for develop. The foundations are going to be dug out as the houses are built. The roads are going to be excavated out as they get ready to construct the roads. So it's not a mass excavation on everything. It's just where the construction needs to be, because no one wants to take dirt out and then have to put it back in to fill a yard up. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so it is specifically it's going to be a spot excavations for the foundation
Correct.
areas that are going to be
Yes.
processed.
And the roads.
In the road.
And utilities and.
Okay. Water discharge.
I'm sorry?
Is the water table in the area? I tried going through because one of the elements in some of the other areas that have gone through the same process, They've all run into water. They've all had to deal with a water discharge.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, yes, there is water table, and it varies anywhere from 6 to 12 feet. Towards the south end of the project is where it's the shallowest, is in the range of 6. And we're looking at peat depths, basically 5 to 7 feet, somewhere in that range. So the idea is, as Mr. Dreyer was saying, is when we excavate out the road, the whole intent is to develop a project, a residential project. So we'll have water lines, sewer lines, storm drain lines, and so these will be put in as that peak comes out.
So this site is a little different than the sites that your petitioner has operated in the past, where he has, I believe, X'd out significant acreage, brought in, fill has been brought in, and they've been processing in that peat. Whereas this one is a spot development, if you will, with the fill coming in for actual construction to be taking place.
It'll be in areas. The project that you're talking about, that scenario was on the north side of Whisperwood Drive. There was a project that was done by Holquest, and that was a mass excavation and then a mass import. So this process is more as the buildings are being built, there'll be a stretch of those buildings that area will be excavated. And the same with the development of the southern portion of Tract A. The roads will all be excavated, and then material will be brought in. Does that answer your question?
It does, and so it differentiates the different sites that have taken place around town, that this now is a development construction site with roads and utilities and so forth. So construction permitting is going to be put in place?
The portion off of Shagaluk and Ophir, those have been constructed under subdivision agreements, and the southern portion of Tract A, which is directly south of where this operation is in that process of design, and it'll be a continuation of what you see out there now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You done, Mr. Strike? Mr. Spring?
Yeah. First of all, I apologize for my confusion about the access. I just saw the map here, and I assumed it was going to go to the south. But another point of confusion is regarding the proposal and the status of lots 3 and 4 on the checkpoint subdivision. It states on the page 8 of the application that construction of streets, driveways, homes within lots 3 and 4 checkpoint subdivision requires the removal of peat and organic soils, blah, 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 and that they're going to process that on site on the plans. So then I see from staff report that peat excavation is a natural resource extraction subject to conditional use. So my question is then, why isn't 3 and 4 included in the application?
Because they've been constructed. Lot 4 is completely constructed, and most of Lot 3 also.
So that
The roads are already built there.
So the application is incorrect, then it's not that it seems like from the application, the background, that the plan is to excavate peat from lots 3 and 4 and process it on site.
Yeah, Lot 4 has already been built. I mean, there's houses out there.
So that's
mostly,
not,
and most of Lot 3.
So that's not
Separate.
correct? Then there's
Yeah, correct. It's kind of, it's merged
excavation.
along the way, and now it's just Tract A.
So there's not going to be any excavation on
Correct.
track 3 and 4?
Yeah.
And that also was stated in the staff report that lot 3 was going to be excavated.
Yes, I was taking my information from the application. And then subsequently, Mr. Dreyer and I spoke, and that's why I put the note on on page 2 that says, under proposal, it says, the second sentence down, this conditional use review concerns only activities occurring on Tract A. Because the application was confusing on that point.
Okay.
Yeah. Things have happened over the last year, so.
Are you done, Mr. Spring? Can I have both your names for the record, please?
Tom Dreher, Dreher spelled like the ice cream.
Okay, got that.
David Grenier, Grenier.
Thank you very much. How many truckloads of material do you estimate will go off-site?
That's 15 to 20 or so.
In over 3 years, or 15 or 20 a day, or an hour, or
I'm sorry?
what's the time period the 15 or 20 trucks will go off the site?
It'd be, according to the application, I forgot which page it's on right now, but it's from, I think, May to October, and for 3 years. I mean, it depends on the economy, but this application's been restricted to 3 years, so.
Okay. But is that 15 or 20 trucks a day, an hour?
Oh, I'm sorry, a day.
A day.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
How many truckloads of sand do you predict will come in a day?
Excuse me.
From the standpoint of the quality of material, we're not totally sure what that is. So at this point, there's not a lot that's anticipated to come in as far as mixing.
What does that mean?
I would say in the range of 200 yards a year. So we're not talking a whole lot. You know, that would be like 20 trucks a year.
Okay, so roughly 5 trucks a month of sand coming in and 15 to trucks a day going out is a rough approximation of the truck traffic.
Again, it would be depending on the size of job. Say there's a project that needs 500 yards of material. There may be material being hauled one day, and then for another 10 days, there's no material being hauled. So we averaged it out as if it were 15 to 20 trucks a day.
Okay. Why do you want to work 7 days a week?
That was just in the original application, but we're agreeing with planning staff's recommendation to have it Monday through Friday. And I think she reduced the hours to 7 to 6, I think, instead of 7 to 7.
I mean,
And we're fine with that.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. We get a packet, we reviewed a packet, and we understand that operation. And then what I'm hearing is quite a bit different than what we got as an application, and that bothers me a lot. Comment?
Which aspect are you talking about? Because all we've really changed is we just changed the access. Instead of going straight up, we just have to go to Newell and then up to.
Access, I had
okay.
assumed you were going to go out on Newell ultimately one way or the other way.
Okay.
But I mean, a 7-day-a-week operation near adjacent homes is a lot more of an impact on a community than a 5-day-a-week operation. I don't know how we can determine, with the information we've received, the amount of yardage of material.
Well, basically, we're responding to staff's comments. They want us to reduce the hours, and so we're agreeing to that. I mean, it makes sense. And so what other aspect of that do I need to clarify? I mean, it's a normal process where
lots 3 and 4 are going to be cut and filled. Lots 3 and 4 are not going to be cut and filled.
Well, it's because they're constructed now. There's actually houses they've recently paved it.
Why were they shown? Why did we have an application that said 3 and 4 on it?
Well, they're developed now, and so they're not going to be a part of this application. So it's all been a reduction in the impact. It's just the process. I mean, we've all been dealing with new code. planning staff, is this is one of the first new codes of this type. When we started, and it's
Don't
been
hear any
challenging.
argument from me on that. I agree with you on that one.
Yeah, and we've been working through it, and it's been a challenge, but we feel like we're getting pretty close here.
Mr.
And it's very critical that we do get approval for this year, because it's be kind of a economic disaster for the owner if we don't. So time is of the essence.
Yeah, thank you, and through the chair, some additional comments, questions. The market tends to dictate the ability to sell that topsoil, and therefore the processing and the processing time, et cetera. The market's been pretty soft the last 2 years, extremely soft. So one of the concerns I would have is, and I'm all for it, let's get the stuff that's on the site, let's get it processed, let's get it out of there. It helps to move the development along. My concern is bringing product from other sites that's not part of the other petitioner's property, bringing it from other sites, bringing it in, and this area becoming a stockpile of other material brought from other parts of town. And if the market isn't there, then this stuff sits and we become a storage yard, not a processing yard. So how do we minimize and put emphasis and priority on processing the materials on this site before we become a storage, so we don't become a storage yard for other sites?
We're agreeing to staff's recommendation that this be limited to 3 years, and we'd have to come back for a public hearing. And at that point in time, staff, of course, would be commenting, and if we had any problems with the public, that would arise at that point also. And we put a note in there, if there's a stockpile left there. I mean, for one, even having a stockpile there is a huge improvement compared to what is normally on this lot. I don't know if you've been around this lot. Mm-hmm. There's tract of land very much. It's been actually quite the eyesore for a long time. But if we need to add a note that after the 3 years we don't get the approval, then whatever is left on there has to be removed.
Well, at the end of the day, we have a residential R3, R4 space. It's not industrial, it's not commercial. So we've got an ongoing operation going on there. My concern is, how do we limit the processing and make this become a storage yard? How do we emphasize the processing on this particular site and not let this become the dumping ground, the storage yard for other sites around town? You said in your petition here, you're going to be accepting a significant amount of yardage of peat from other sites.
Well, there's no advantage for us because the owners own this property, and the end goal is to build houses. It's a R4 high density area. So I don't quite understand the question there of the negative impact. I only see positive impacts going on here.
The other sites processing peat in town have accepted peat from other sites. It has delayed their own processing of peat and the activity on those sites. I've seen that firsthand. So I'm sorry, I'm not following. Why would we want to mess up the property that we own so we can't construct houses on that? It doesn't make any sense. Any peat from any other source?
Because in the meantime, for this case, in the next 3 years, it fits in. It makes logical sense.
I think you just contradicted yourself. Why would you accept peat from another when you can excavate and manage your own space? Why would you take peat from another site?
I see what you're saying. The area that we're talking about is only the north side. The entire south is going to be built first. That's where utilities are coming in. So we're going to start construction on the south half and then work to the north. And it's the owner that owns this, so he's not going to want to restrict the development when he gets up to that area.
The approximate
a pile of peat is nothing to move away compared to profits and whatnot, and the dollar volume of building roads, public sewer, public water, paved streets, and curb and gutter and whatnot.
You're going to process that on site, but the approximate amount of material hauled onto the site from off-site sources over the 3 to 5 year period is estimated to be 30,000 cubic yards. That's not borrowing from this current site, the 17 acres that you have here. That's coming from other sites. That's a big exception of then processing your own peat on site. Now you're bringing peat from other sites, and now you're a processing yard.
Yeah, that's always been a part of our application, that some is going to come off-site from other areas. For instance, the pile that's there now came from the Widener project to the south there. It's a temporary pile. If they don't get approval, of course, we have to move it. But this is part of the construction. There's developments. They have excess peat. They need to do something with it. And this is business. You take the peat, you mix it, you process it, and people buy it, and you buy it for your garden to grow roses or whatnot. We're not doing anything evil here.
So your priority is to do both. I understand where you're coming from now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Stay near the mic because we're taping this, and even though we can hear you, the tape recorder can't. Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, to follow up on what Commissioner Strike had to say, would it be, and this is more a question to the commission than it is to the petitioner, and that would be, should we potentially add a recommendation that they be not allowed to bring additional peat in and only limit it to sand or other amendments to create topsoil and not additional peat be brought from other locations? I don't know. I'm offering that as a possibility, a discussion for the commission.
Commissioner Kange?
Thank you. I think that's, it could possibly be a good idea, but I think given what I see in staff's recommendations and what the petitioners has to do with, and I think bringing material in is again, is it noise, is it traffic? But I think what they're very restricted and have to provide some serious reports, noise study, dust control plans. So while I think the intent of Commissioner Dean's suggestion is right on, I feel that there's enough stipulations in them doing this. I mean, if traffic comes back and says you got too many trucks coming, they're going to have to change their plan anyway. So my thought is, I think given the limited time, staff has done a good job putting this together with the recommendations. I think it's clearly can limit what they're planning on doing here. So that just for my 2 cents.
Thank you. You got a couple minutes for rebuttal.
So Glenn Ball with American Landscaping. And so to answer your question about excess peat on the site, currently we're in a point right now where we can't produce fast enough to meet the demand that the public has for this material. If you have noticed driving around town, there's several operations that don't exist anymore. 2 of them are mine, just from development. So these sites shut down. So there's just not enough time in the day right now to make enough to satisfy the need of the public and the whatever the commercial sector, as far as the DOT roads and MOA roads. I mean, we're going to get to a point where processing and being able to make enough is going to be an issue, and our prices are all going to go up, and then so is everything else going to go along with it. So this is for me, I'm seeing it as an opportunity to lessen my costs so that we can produce a cost-effective product. Also looking at it as there's all this development going on and all this traffic around town. We're just going to minimize that. We're going to lessen the impact of traffic on the roads. All these big trucks aren't going to be dancing all over town, beating up our highways, beating up our roads. They're going to come to somewhere that's closer to them. It's not going to be filling up the dumps. It's not going to be causing all kinds of traffic nuisances all over town. So there's a lot of other benefits here than just Xing the peat off of this site. The site's going to be developed anyways. They're going to put the peat somewhere. Do you want it in the dump, or do you want to process and do what should be done with it? Further, we currently have a bond in place to protect the owner of the property against something like that. So if there is an excess of material, which I just can't see it happen, that there's money already set aside to make sure that gets moved off.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Dean, then Mr. Kange.
Through the chair, I had one more question for clarification on the recommendations. On number 16E, it says clearly delineate any areas of existing vegetation to be preserved and indicate how these areas will be cordoned off to prevent inadvertent removal or damage. I'm kind of curious. I just can't envision that there's really anything you really want to save. But I was curious. You know, this is kind of an interesting statement. It is. It's pretty loaded. So.
Peter Briggs, BRI GGS, through the chair. For delineating the areas, we had double impact with the requested fence. Since the operations area will be fenced, all equipment operations will be happening within that space, keeping construction traffic away, or operations traffic away from the trees that we planted to meet landscape requirements, as well as from the perimeter buffer. The perimeter buffer, the existing vegetation that's out there is mixed quality, but it's pretty typical within that corridor. Since it's freeway landscaping, it's meant to be of Alaska character, so it does look natural in state. Does that answer your question?
You done, Ms. Dean? Mr. Kange?
Thank you to the chair. For staff, the petitioner's representative made some notes with regard to page 11 through 14 on our packet. I think 2A, 3, 13, and 15. Are you okay with those changes?
Sorry, could they be stated again? One thing I want to note that does the commission want to include the updated plans 7/3/2015 in that list under 2A or not? We don't support that because, as I stated earlier, staff hasn't had a chance to review it thoroughly at this point, nor have agencies.
Okay, let's stick with 2A real quick because that's where we wanted to change the date to the plan of 7/3/15, correct?
Correct.
So staff, you're not okay with the 7/3/15 plan? You'd rather keep it at 11/3/14?
Yes, we would.
Subject to review of the 7/3/15 plan. Would that be okay?
Yes. Or 11/3, is that what you said?
I'm sorry, 11/3/14 remains, and then if we put in there subject to staff's review or acceptance of the 7/3/15 plan.
Okay.
What would be a reasonable date that you could review the 7/3 plan and get back to us?
Well, we would have to, route this plan to all the agencies, and that's, typically we give them maybe 4 weeks to do that. So, well, I mean, they have other projects they're reviewing ahead of this, so we would be asking them to drop everything else they're reviewing. And
Could they still operate based on the 11/3, or I'm sorry, on the 11/3/14 plan, or is it that?
Well, the big.
Or could they still operate under the 7/3/15 plan?
No, because it's a huge issue of how they're gaining access to the site.
I mean, we can handle the access.
Okay.
I mean, we could say that access will be via Newell Street, period.
Okay, so.
But there is the question of which document they're using, and that.
Well, that's what I'm saying is the petitioner's representative wanted to change it to 7/3, and I'm just clarifying with staff.
No,
that'll work, and clearly that won't work for staff. So then it leads us to the access issue. So if we left 2A, the natural resource extraction plan dated 11/3/14.
Which one are you on, Mr. Kane?
I'm on page 11, division recommendations, 2A.
Okay.
Petitioner's representative wanted to change that to the current plan, which staff hasn't had a chance to get agency comment from. So I'm just trying to move this thing along here and
keep on roll.
Let the petitioner representative get to work on this. So the same thing would be on page 12(3). The petitioner's representative wanted to change the approval is valid until October 31/18. And I think you mentioned, Mr. Dreher, that this was to be 7/3/18.
I'm sorry, which number were you on?
Talking to my ear when you were
Which number were you on?
number 3. Did I write that down wrong?
2B,
Okay, 2B.
yes.
So that's changed. You wanted to change that to 7.3.15.
Right. The only change on the plan was that access.
Okay. Staff, how does that work for your understanding of this? It's only the access. Okay. So staff would be okay.
Only the access.
Staff
Okay,
would be okay with 2B.
we answered that one. That helps.
Staff would be okay with 2B, changing that date to the 15/7/3.
Yes, if you're going to have another condition regarding access, yes.
Okay. 7/3/15. And the other change I heard on page 13, item 13, changing from 8-foot fence to 6-foot fence. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Staff,
fine.
you're okay with a 6-foot fence?
Yes, I proposed it to Mr. Dryer, yes, so.
Thank you, ma'am. And 15, we had install L3 screening landscape for areas, and Petitioner's representative recommended as shown on the landscaping plan.
No, because we don't agree with that, because that's the landscaping plan I saw earlier. They don't show any landscaping for, if you look on the first page, the landscaping just covers the northern part of Tract A. There's no landscaping shown for the southern part of it.
Is that something that, if that change doesn't get made, is that going to hinder you guys if we leave it adjacent to residential zones prior to extraction activities?
Yes, the landscape plan has never actually changed as far as the landscaping goes anywhere. It's always been just around the area that's actually being utilized. The area to the south, the southern half of Tract A, is going to be excavated no matter what. It doesn't make any sense to put landscaping around down there or fencing.
Would it be fair to change this comment to something work with staff to address the residential areas or screening of residential areas?
Yeah, as shown on our landscape plan. That's,
Okay.
I mean, the first one and the second one, because all we changed on both of those plans was just the access. The landscape has always stayed the same.
Okay. And that was the only changes I had. 15 was the last one out of those pages, 11 through 14 in our staff packet.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, the number 11, I believe the suggestion from the petitioner was, could you read it for me again?
To leave it as is, except for at the end, put in or obtain a driveway permit from the MOA for access to Newell Street, which means we have to go through their review for a driveway access permit. And there's no reason why they would not grant us the driveway access onto Newell is legal, and we could probably have 3 out there.
It's just another application. So staff, you're okay with that amendment to 11?
Again, we haven't had anyone look at that. That access is going to be entirely from Newell Street. We thought earlier it would be shared among a network of streets rather than just the one street.
But still contingent on the plans that they have to get with DHHS, correct? I mean, they'd still have to show it.
Yeah, those still have to do a dust control plan and make sure the streets are cleaned up, or Newell Street is cleaned up.
Okay.
Mr. Kange, may I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
If I have listened to everybody, we have a map, or a drawing dated 4/23/2015 that has been reviewed by staff, and we've been told by the applicant the only change between this one and the July 3rd is that access is now shown onto Newell Street. So why don't we use the 4/23 map amended to show access to Newell?
That's fine.
I mean, they've looked at it, it's been circulated. That's okay, but, so we use the 4/23 amended to show access to Newell, is what I am suggesting.
It's fine. Yeah, that's fine. It's perfect.
Seconded.
Ms. Ferguson, are you?
Yes, I wanted to go back to the landscape screening issue. On page 4 of the staff report, midway in the document on that page, it says screening, and this is taken from the code. It's code language. Number 4, screening at a minimum, L3 screening landscaping is required where adjacent to residential zones. The Planning and Zoning Commission, through the conditional use review, may require additional screening. So at minimum, they're required to put L3 screening landscaping where it's adjacent to residential zones. And they are just showing, part of the site. Their landscape plan doesn't show all of Tract A. It's only showing the northern part of Tract A. And I was trying to make that point earlier.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I think that's the crux of it. What the petitioner is trying to get to is a viable project in the near term. Leaving it open-ended to say that you have the ability to ask for L3 landscaping anywhere on the site where there's residential or to be residential is not clear to me. They've defined an area where they're going to be processing the operation. Everything else seems to be removal of peat that would otherwise be removed anyway as a condition of a residential development. I see no problem with what the petitioner has approved and clarified. I think it helps move it forward and helps get things going.
I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, on that. Mr. Kange, can you restate your motion?
Through the chair.
Wait a minute.
We have to close the public testimony.
Okay. All right. Hang on to your thought for a minute. Do you have any further testimony?
Just a clarification for item number 15, would it be possible to politely recommend wording for the L3 screening one as a recommended change? If you would humor that.
Okay, I'm back on 15.
Install L3 screening landscape between the operations area and adjacent residential zones prior to operations. And then keeping the last provide a landscape plan to planning division for approval prior to installation. I think that would meet some of the discussion as well as Commissioner Robinson's comment about it being tight and around the operations area rather than spread throughout the site.
Yeah.
Yes. Install L3 screening landscaping between the operations area and adjacent residential zones prior to operations, which is depicted by the graphic as provided. No, I'm not adding that. I'm stating that's what we're showing.
Okay. Mr. Spring, quickly.
I'd just like to make one comment, 2 comments before the motion's made. So
We're going to go to public hearing before we get back to the motion, but go ahead, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, well, this might be something you might want to answer too. But I have 2 concerns, I guess. One is the condition number 10C, which talks about circulation and the need for shaker boards and other methods of truck cleaning shall be prepared and implemented should air quality or tracking of materials into adjacent road become an issue. To me, that's kind of a problem just because it's so vague, and I don't know who's going to make that determination or when is it going to be made, or is anybody, It seems to me the nature of this project is tremendous amount of dirt moving around, so there's going to be some tracking. And it seems to me in the past, when I've worked with issues like this, it's been required as a matter of course, without waiting for some complaint or without waiting for some. So I would recommend adding some changes to that, which would say prepared and implemented tracking cleaning plans should be prepared and implemented to address air quality or tracking materials onto adjacent roads, and would take out should and become an issue. Second, this is just for the consideration of the motion maker. I don't know if this probably is going to be a problem, but I think we should prohibit access to the south as a matter of course. I don't know about the viability of it, but they show a map here with the road connection from Takatna Drive down to Camelot and Newell, It could be that it'd be shorter for somebody to come through, 4th Avenue and come up that way and to the site. I don't know. It just seems like maybe that would be wise to prohibit access to the south, which I think would become a problem.
Would that not be covered under provide a haul route, item 14, provide a haul route plan to the traffic division?
Well, this would give direction to the planning division, to the traffic division, I think, and I don't know what they would consider. I'm disappointed in the traffic division in that I didn't see any comments from them, and it seems like there should have been something, so I would like to give direction to them in this case.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we're not planning on having any trucks coming down Camelot Drive. That was never part of the plan.
Fourth.
Can you clarify?
That was your concern, excuse me?
It's not
What's
Camelot.
Camelot?
Don't confuse Camelot.
Oh,
What
I'm sorry.
you're talking about is Newell Street down to 4th. What's your plan for access down to the south of the site?
Down Newell, none.
So you,
I mean, down the west property line there? Yeah, that road's not built.
your site plan, I don't know which one this is, the original one, shows a sort of connection down here to the intersection at Honeysuckle and Camelot, which seems to suggest potentially some routes.
Yeah, that's actually an easement. That's actually a public use easement to cut or.
Yeah, but
me.
you're proposing to
No.
get to it, right? You going to use it or not?
That's actually a public use easement. Eventually, a road is going to be built all the way from Newell down to Widener's project down there at some point in time. It's part of it's a public use easement. It's just like a right-of-way, but it's not a right-of-way.
Yeah, I know. I don't care what it is. I mean, it's legal to be used. The question is, are you planning to use it? That's the question.
To access down to Honeysuckle, I don't know why we'd want to go down there. No, we're not planning on
What's
that.
shown
It's
is
not
what's shown
it's
relative.
not built.
I
I apologize.
No, it's not shown there. You're just seeing an underlying easement line, a public use easement line.
That portion of Newell is unconstructed.
Well, I know that, but you could use a truck to get on and off the property. I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is
Oh.
it related to the extraction or the peat, or is it related to the future subdivision development? I don't know what it is.
We're not going to access down there. That easement line is related to future developments.
So it sounds like, Mr. Spring, if you have a
We're not
amendment to that effect, it's not a problem.
Correct.
All right. You have 2.5 minutes.
I do.
But don't go far. I'm going to open the public hearing. I don't think
Oh.
there's going to be a crowd of people, and then you'll have a chance to rebut.
I don't know. Tim might want to.
I will now open the public hearing on case 2014-0195. If you want to testify, come forward. Form a line to the left. Tickets are $3. If you want, going once, going twice. I now close the public hearing on case 2014-0195. Why can't I close it? Well, okay, I'm going to call it the rebuttal. You now have 2.5 minutes of rebuttal if you choose.
I'll just answer questions. I think we've gone
I don't think
through
we
everything.
have any questions
Oh, okay. Good.
in the queue. You may be, sit
All right.
down.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Kange, did we stall you long enough to get you organized? Okay, thank you very much. We have Mr. Kange.
Subject to the division recommendations as outlined in our staff packet on pages 1 through 14 with some amendments. Hopefully you've captured all of those. I don't have to repeat them all. I would like to, and Tyler, jump in because this 2A that I would like to amend. We're going to use the plan of 11/3/2014. 2B,
No, it's 4/23/15.
sorry, 4/23/15.
2015.
Mine says 4/20/15, but 4/23/15. Two B, 15/04/23. I would like to amend 10C to read, well, the first sentence stays the same. Second sentence, strike plans for, begins with installation of a truck wash, shaker boards, or other method of truck cleaning shall be prepared and implemented to prevent tracking of materials onto adjacent roads, period. I'd like to amend 11. Last sentence to say, or obtain a driveway permit for access to Newell Street. 13, I would like to change from 8-foot tall chain link fence to 6-foot tall chain link fence. 15, this is how I'll read it. Install L3 screening landscaping between the operations area and adjacent residential zones prior to extraction activities. And I would like to add an 18. Second. Strike what I said about adding an 18. I think we covered it in the prior one.
We have a motion and we have a second. Mr. Kange and Mr. Voorhees, do you care to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would. With regard to this case, I feel that the requirements have been met under AMC 2105-060B6. I find that this is supported by testimony from staff. I feel that the restrictions are adequate enough to maintain dust-free, noise-free pollution to the adjacent properties. That's all I have.
Mr. Voorhees?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the reason why I'm supporting this motion has been covered in the findings. Thank you.
Mr. Robinson, then Ms. Ferguson.
I have potentially a clarification and an amended motion. I think that we need a 2C that reflects that the plans are to be updated to reflect access to Newell rather than from boundary. In other words, then staff can feel comfortable they're accepting the plans they've reviewed, but we're acknowledging that effectively the real change is that there's no longer direct access to boundary. I don't know that we've said that explicitly anywhere.
I agree. I might have gone in a bit of a hurry because I know we discussed that, so I'm willing to entertain that or add that to my amendment or to my motion.
So if I just say a motion to add a 2C, plans shall be amended to show access to Newell rather than direct access to boundary.
I acquiesce to that.
You done, Mr. Robinson?
So that I have another one, but maybe we just handle that amendment to the main motion.
Well, I think he's accepted it, and Mr. Voorhees has accepted it, so I think that's covered.
Is that good enough, Lori? Okay. The second one, if I may, is on number 11. I think it's still unclear to me. It still makes it sound like it's contingent on removal of the plat note, the way that we have it worded, and I don't want that to be the case. I think perhaps we state both of them, such as direct access to boundary is contingent upon the removal of plat note number 1 and obtaining permit from ADOT for access from Boundary Avenue.
Thank you for clarifying my motion on 11, Mr. Robinson.
And then the second one would be access to Newell is contingent upon receiving a driveway permit from the MOA.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay.
Mr. Voorhees, are you okay with that one? Are you done, Mr. Robinson?
I am.
Ms. Ferguson?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, for your last condition. I was wondering about that one. Thank you for making that clear. The question I had was on condition 15. I'm assuming that we still want to retain that second sentence, provide a landscape plan to the Planning Division for approval prior to installation?
Yes, ma'am. My intent was just to change that first sentence. Sorry I didn't clarify that better.
Yep, thank you.
Do we have any further discussion on this motion? Please use your machines. Motion carries 7-0. Mr. Kange, findings?
You already
Got
got it.
them? Mr. Voorhees? No? We were, to the applicant, we were fortunate we could find a way to handle it. Getting a drawing to us the day before the meeting doesn't work. And I was ready to vote no. And I would have if because of that. We need an opportunity to review it and understand it. And I know you're in a hurry, and I appreciate you're in a hurry, and I appreciate your work with Title 21, but we have to be able to understand what we vote. Thank you. Okay, let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back.
That's what I was trying to, so I still think if she wants to do an overall staff presentation, but then ask her to do a presentation on section 1, then section 2, right?
Yeah, no, we got that handled.
You got it? Okay.
Got it. We got it handled.
Because otherwise we're not getting through it.
Good evening. We are case 2015-0049, amendments to various sections of the new code. It's the chair's intent to, at 11 o'clock, we're going to turn into pumpkins if we go that long. So we will do that. I've talked to Ms. McConnell. She does not, and I agree, we're just going to start and do it by section, not do an overall staff report. We have heard it frequently enough and often enough on it. So we'll start there and we'll go on that. I am working off principally the May 18th memorandum on it. And I am turning to page 5 of 26, which is section 1 of that. And if you would give us a quick overview on what section 1 does, and I am particularly interested where there are any conflicts or disagreements with the assembly ordinance we handled last week, our last meeting. Ms. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does anyone have the Hall-Dembowski ordinance with them? Because I forgot to bring mine, so you may have to help me with that. So F2 on page 1, this gives a maximum length of a building if it's 3 stories, and it can be longer if it's 2 stories or 1 story. One of the amendments recommends deleting F2C, which is lines 29 through 31, because in the multiple structures on a lot section, the type of review goes through, is done by how many units are in the development. So this kind of has the potential to be a conflict with that. So we propose to scratch F2C. It's in the R2M district. In the R3 district, it also sets a maximum length of a townhouse-style building, and this is a way to control kind of bulk in the district. In the R4, this is on page 2, section H, I believe that everything under H2D is deleted in the Hall-Dembowski ordinance. And then H2E, it sets a maximum length for townhouse-style buildings in the R4 district. And section I, the R4A district, this, in this ordinance, it increases the baseline FAR from 1 to 1.5 before you start going through the bonuses, but I believe the Hall-Dembowski ordinance it takes out the bonus system and sets the FAR at 2 in the R4 and 3 in the R4A. So you wouldn't need any amendment in the R4A district if you preferred the Hall-Dembowski ordinance. You would need only H2E under section H in the R4 district.
Would your worksheet help you?
Yes.
You get my whole packet, but it's got your worksheet in it. I might, but
So I have nothing else on section 1 unless you have any questions.
staff, any questions on 1? Mr. Spring.
You, in your recommendations for approval, you said that F2C you recommend deleting.
Correct.
Can you explain that a little bit?
In 110, I think it's G, let me just find the section. G2, which regulates multiple structures on one lot. This was actually a section that was put in by the Planning and Zoning Commission to address what we think of as site condos and other situations where you have multiple residential structures on a single lot. Currently, it says that applicable developments between 3 and 15 dwelling units shall be approved by administrative site plan review. Applicable developments with 16 or more dwelling units shall be approved by major site plan review. There's an amendment in this packet later on that changes those numbers to say that an administrative site plan review would be required for between 3 and 30 dwelling units, and you wouldn't go to your major site plan review, which is your public hearing site plan review, until you had 31 dwelling units. So if you had, assuming that is acceptable, if you had 31 dwelling units, you'd be in conflict with F2C, because F2C says it shall be done by administrative site plan review, but later on it says if you have 31 or more, it would be a major site plan review. So it isn't necessary here because it's addressed in the other section.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. McConnell? Mr. Robinson.
I don't know how you want to, if you're going to entertain discussion about the sections as we go or not.
Yeah, we're going to take a section, talk about it, and then.
Do you want a motion on the table to talk about it, or do you want to go into committee in a whole and talk about it?
We can't go in a committee of the whole until we have a motion. So why don't you make a motion, then we'll go into the committee of the whole.
I can either do that, or I can make a motion to adopt section 1.
Your choice.
All right, I make a motion to go into the committee of the whole.
Okay.
So first question is, what's the preference of the body on how you want to handle this stuff?
I was just realizing that. I was thinking we'd do it section by section, but I'm wide open to any other way to do it.
And by do it, you mean actually amend the section and get done with it?
1 make a motion on section 1, get rid of it, go to section 2. I mean, that's the only way I can't get my head around all 8 of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my thought on section 1 is, it's one of the more significant ones where there's conflict with the previous ordinance. It basically, that one took a lot of height and FAR, and therefore the need for bonus, system away. And this one, let's just put it this way, both amendments recognize that there were problems with the existing code, right? Both ordinances. It's the degree to which it's fixed. And my only issue is I don't know that we've fixed it. I mean, these amendments come on the basis of really, I think, 1 or 2 projects that were actually being developed. So maybe they fixed them for those, but I don't know if they work generally. So that I can tell you, this is one of the ones that I'm most unclear of where I want to go. The other piece is I may just say, yeah, I approve this, but at the end might make a finding that I approve this because if the other one gets voted down at the assembly, I'd like to have something. And so it's sort of a backup plan from my perspective, but I'm interested in other people's opinions. Clearly it's trying to fix the problem.
Ms. Dean and Mr. Spring.
I'm looking at the Halden-Bosque ordinance, and as I look at the one that the staff has presented, we start out with R2M, F, and then we go to G, R3, and then we go to H, R4. In the Halden-Bosque ordinance, they go right to H, R4, and they change the floor area ratio. Would it make sense to basically compare the 2 ordinances side by side and look at the things that we've already approved on the Halden-Bosque ordinance and see how that applies to this? One of the things, for example, that the Halden-Bosque ordinance does deal with, and that's the floor area ratio, which is not addressed in the staff document.
That's not true. That's not true.
Oh, it's not true? Am I
No.
incorrect?
You're incorrect.
Okay.
Okay.
Am I off on a tangent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Give me a minute. Mr. Spring, and then.
Well, I wasn't at the meeting, so I'm at a disadvantage. I understood that the commission approved recommend approval of the Halden-Bosque ordinance.
We did.
So shouldn't we be consistent? I don't want to rehash this. Why are we even talking about adopting or recommending adoption of those parts of this section that we've already deleted?
Well, you're on to a track. What I was going to point out is the floor area ratio on the R4 and R4A, I believe, I just gave my notes to Erica, but I believe the Halden-Bosque ordinance went to 1.75, and this ordinance went to 1.5. No? Okay. No.
So to be clear, the Halden-Bosque ordinance does nothing with maximum building length. If I can get an acknowledgement from Erica on that one.
That's correct.
And it just deals with FAR and height by raising the FAR to 2 in the R4 and 3 in R4A. Did I have that right?
In both situations, it eliminates a tiered bonus system, and it just says in the R4, there's no maximum height, and in the R4A, there's no floor area bonus. You get 2 in the R4 and 3 in the R4A.
But we put a limit on the maximum height?
You guys did recommend 70 feet in the R4. You did not recommend a maximum in the R4A. But R4A height is not in our ordinance here.
That's what this thing is going to.
So, and just to build on that, I mean, this ordinance takes the R4, moves it to 70 feet, but requires that you participate in the bonus system structure. So in a way, at least on R4, the height is consistent, but you don't necessarily have to do the things that you have to do under this structure to get to that 70 feet. Now, how you actually equate a height limit with an FAR bonus system, I'm still a little hazy on how that exactly works, but theoretically, you would bump up against some FAR limit as you try to get to the height, right? Is that the thinking?
Yes, and that you get some of the public amenities provided through the FAR bonus system as you went taller. If you want to make these consistent, I would eliminate lines 13 through 40 on page 2 and lines 5 through 32 on page 3.
Ms. McConnell, could you reference our staff packet that's 164 pages? Because I didn't bring mine and I'm working off of the screen.
Sure, I apologize.
So, no, that's okay. I know what I just want to make sure I'm on the same page as you.
This is
20, page
28.
Yeah.
Does that look right? Page 2 of 8 in the ordinance?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to be consistent with the action you took on the Hall-Dembowski ordinance, you would delete lines 13 through 40 on that page, and on the following page, you would delete lines 5 through 32. Because you've already recommended approval of amendments to those sections that do different things, so you just don't need to have those sections in this ordinance if you want to be consistent. Now, Mr. Robinson does have a point that if the Assembly rejects the Hall-Dembowski ordinance, they're going to be looking at these things without your recommendation.
You have yours.
Commenting on Mr. Robinson's point of view, this thing is too complex to play what-ifs. So I think we need to just assume that the Hall-Dembowski is going to go forward, and if it doesn't, we do the best job we can here.
Well, I think, given that way we're not in conflict with what we just approved, one thing, and two, if it gets denied, we're kind of back to the drawing board with this one and can move forward looking at one document as opposed to trying to compare two, which are, in my opinion, very, very different documents, right?
They are.
So when does that come up for assembly, the Hall-Dembowski?
A week from Tuesday, I think.
Again, they opened the public hearing at their last meeting. They ran out of time, so they took no action. So I'm assuming that the public hearing will continue at the next meeting, which is a week from tomorrow. And I don't know whether they will take action or postpone action until the 28th when this ordinance is before them for public hearing.
And I was told, I don't know if you've heard, but that there may be a assembly work session Friday.
They're scheduled, and neither Tom nor I will be present, so Mr. Weaver will be carrying the water on that.
I do have the resolution that we did approve tonight related to the Hall-Dembowski and the minutes, and unfortunately, there's not enough information really to sit and go, okay, this is what we modified, because there were some things we modified from the Hall-Dembowski ordinance. So what we've got here isn't necessarily what we approved, too. That makes it hard.
Yeah. Okay, Erica, you were talking about pages 2 and 3. What were your you gave us some line numbers. It took me to just now to get pages 2 and 3 in front of me.
Page 2, lines 13 through 40. And page 3, lines 5 through 32.
You believe, it's your belief that if we were to delete those lines, we would be consistent between the two ordinances?
Yes.
We We have a motion by Mr. Robinson.
I move that we come out of the committee of the whole.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, we're out of the committee of the whole.
I'd like to make a motion that in the matter of 2015-0049, specifically pertaining to Section 1, that we recommend adoption to the Assembly of Section 1 with the deletion of lines 13 through 40 on page 2 and 5 through 33 on page 3.
We have a second for Mr. Strike. Mr. Spring.
Can I add a friendly motion to delete lines 29 through 31 as recommended by staff?
Yes.
Which page are you on, Mr. Spring?
Page 1 of the ordinance.
Okay.
'29 to 31.
Through the chair, may I ask for clarification? Erica, you had said lines 5 through 32 on page 3, and then we just had 5 through 33.
That's fine.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to speak to the motion.
Mr. Robinson.
I'm going to support the motion. I think this ordinance has recognized that we've had some issues discovered with the FAR bonus system, as well as the length of buildings allowed in our multifamily zoning districts. The Commission's desire is to go with a simpler solution of simply allowing by right FAR at this point in time, acknowledging that there is some good work that has been done that could be looked at in the future, if so desired.
We have a second by Mr. Strike. Any other comments on this motion? Please use your machines. That motion is carried. Ms. McConnell, Section 2, please.
Section 2 is in Exhibit A, so if you would turn to the first exhibit after the end of the ordinance, which should be around page 35, for those of you working off a screen. It says Exhibit A at the top. It's a page off of Table 21.06-1. And this section increases the maximum lot coverage for multifamily development and non-residential development in the R4 district from 50% to 60%, and it increases the maximum lot coverage for mixed-use dwellings, multifamily dwellings, and non-residential uses in the R4A district from 65% to 75%. This was not addressed in the Hall-Dembowski ordinance.
Mr. Robinson, are you out of the queue? Are you in the queue?
Yeah, I had a question for staff. I mean, is it true to say that to be consistent, we'd have to amend the height portion of the table, or can we suggest that the amendment that we've just made would be carried over to the table?
I think that's addressed in the other ordinance, so you wouldn't need to worry about it here.
Thank you.
Mr. Spring?
Yeah, it seems like this makes sense. I'm not sure we have to go into committee of a whole on this one. It seems like in order to meet the maximum lot coverage, you're going to have to build underground parking or some parking structure or something, which is better than having surface parking all over the lot. So I don't see any problem with maximum coverage increasing in these districts.
Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, I move in matter case 2015-0049, Section 2, that we recommend approval as stated by staff.
This is on Exhibit
A? So Section 2 referencing Exhibit A,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. We have a motion, second by Commissioner Strike. Any discussion on Section 2, Exhibit A? Any discussion? please use your machines. That motion is passed. Section 3, Ms. McConnell.
Section 3 makes some adjustments to the height transition for neighborhood compatibility provisions, which make it a little bit more flexible. This was a section, so this sets an angle under which development in commercial districts, industrial districts, and the R4 and the R4A have to fit their buildings if they're within 200 feet of a lower density residential district, or of a residential district that isn't the R4 or the R4A. And it's to prevent, or to, not prevent, but to mitigate, minimize shadowing on these usually lower density lots, and it's to encourage more creative placement of buildings on the lot in order to minimize the impacts on the neighboring lots. The Hall-Dembowski ordinance recommended deleting this section in its entirety. This was one place where the commission did not agree. I'm sorry, they didn't recommend it to delete it in the entirety. They recommended to so limit the number of zoning districts in which this would apply that it wouldn't actually have a very significant effect. The commission rejected that change and proposed to leave the applicability as written. And what this section does is it adds some exceptions and some conditions under which the daylight plane can be penetrated by the building. So it adds a little bit of flexibility to the requirement to meet this daylight plane situation. In that's the section under D. Moving on to the section under E, floor area ratio. This makes two changes. It clarifies that when we speak about uninhabitable attics as not counting for determining floor area ratio, we are talking about attics in residential structures. And at the top of the next page, which is page 5 of 8, we remove a provision that limited that floor area that is below grade as not counting towards the FAR only when it's parking or loading. And we said, well, and I actually found that came from our old code for some reason, but basically if the floor area is below grade, it doesn't really matter what it's used for because it still isn't adding to the bulk of the building that's above ground. So we proposed deleting the phrase that is devoted to parking or loading so that any floor area in stories below grade are not considered when measuring floor area ratio. So those are the two changes in section 3.
Mr. Robinson?
I'd like to move that we approve section 3 as written by staff.
I'm confused right now. I'm trying to read. Ms. McConnell was reading from pages 4 of 8 and 5 of 8, and I'm trying to relate those to section 3 shown on page 7 of 26, and I can't get them to relate. What am I missing?
So on page 7 of 26, the amendments to the exceptions, and these are the exceptions for height transitions for neighborhood compatibility. So the word exceptions is at the very bottom of page 3 of 8 in the ordinance.
That's where the 8 comes from. Okay.
Yeah, so that increases flexibility in the height transition requirements so that the first 3 paragraphs on page 7 of 26 talk about the exceptions to the height transition grade plane, giving more flexibility. And then the 4th paragraph, areas not counting when measuring floor area ratio, is about allowing any floor area below grade to not count rather than just floor area used for parking.
All right, now, how will this impact what we passed with the Hall and Domboski ordinance?
That will have no effect. It is consistent with that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robinson, and we have a second by Mr. Kange.
I'll be supporting the motion. Well, supporting the motion.
Commissioner Spring.
I'll be supporting the motion. I think this is a key. I think this is a key part of the design standards. I mean, if you're going to have, and this is kind of a finding, I guess. If you're going to have some higher density thrust in the middle of an existing residential neighborhood, I think sunlight, as we've heard in many cases from various public testimony, is a critical issue. People don't want their sunlight cut off, and without this, I think we run into real opposition and difficulty explaining to community groups and neighbors that, yeah, this density, even though it's in the comp plan, is not going to hurt your quality of life, and because we have this daylight portion of the design standards.
Any other comments on this motion before we vote? Seeing here none, use your machine, please. I don't think this next one's going to be as easy. I've read these. Section 4, Ms. McConnell.
Section 4 refers to Exhibit B. Exhibit B is the private open space section. Comes right after Exhibit A. Can everybody find that? So I'll just walk quickly through the changes in Exhibit B. We add some purpose statements. We have removed.
What page?
What page?
Tried to bluff her way by saying everybody could find that. She was bluffing.
30-something. Let's see, 26, 28. Let me just make some.
Page 7 of 1 of what mine says on the bottom.
36 is correct.
Having 19 different page numbers doesn't help.
Found it?
Got it.
Okay. In B1, so it used to say that in the R3 and the R4A district, R4 and R4A districts, and you can see this grayed out, it used to say that at least half of the private open space shall be shared in common among the units. So we've clarified up in number 1 that for townhouse-style structures, you can provide the required open space either as individual private open space for each unit or as common private open space, unless common open space is required in subsection 110F2, which we'll get to later. And we made this change because we heard that particularly for small infill developments where you're doing maybe 2, 3-unit townhouse buildings, it's often very difficult to get common open space. You'll provide a yard for each townhouse that's often fenced in separately, but to take half of the requirement and make it into some common area is very challenging, especially when you have a nice rectangular site and you can just fit the 6 units that I'm using as an example. So we heard that and we said, okay, that makes sense. The open space can be all private for those situations. However, for multifamily style construction, at least half the required open spaces shall be provided as common. And then we also clarified that you don't have to provide any individual private open space for multifamily style construction. This was a question that we got a lot from developers. They were thinking they had to provide individual private open space for multifamily, and you don't have to. You can provide it all in common. But you can also provide some private through balconies or ground floor areas for the ground floor units if you want. And then we just brought a provision that was in 5B, we moved it up to the top, that you can't combine residential private open space with non-residential private open space if you have a mixed-use development. So that's B1. Then we proposed reducing the R2M required open space from 480 to 400 square feet, the R3 private open space from 400 to 280 square feet, the R4 and the R4A district private open space from 120 to 100 square feet. One of the main reasons for doing this is we found that by having a minimum dimension in this new code that's a little bit bigger than the minimum dimension in the old code, we were getting better quality open space, and so we just didn't need as much of it. And so we were able to reduce the amount required. And I would also remind you that on the next page, 2 pages later, there's a provision for incentives for high quality spaces, whereby you can get a 25% reduction in the total open space needed if it's less, has an average slope of less than 5%, is well drained and not wetlands, has a minimum inside dimension of 23 feet, and receives sunlight access on the majority of the open space for at least 4 hours per day between the spring and fall equinox. So you have the opportunity to take your 400 down to 300, your 280 down to, sorry, I'm not good at math in my head, and your 100 down to 75 square feet per unit. So those numbers, we're proposing to reduce them. They can be reduced even further through the provision of high-quality open space. And then on 5B at the top of page, it is essentially page 37, but also 7-2 in Exhibit B, it is consistent in bringing the 120 square feet down to 100 square feet when you have dwelling units in a development in a B1, B1A, B1B, B3, or RO district. Moving down to D, standards. D1C, we've made a change to say that you can reduce the dimension of your private open space a little bit if it's adjacent to required site perimeter landscaping, as long as you don't have a barrier between those two things. So we just wanted to clarify that normally you can't count your perimeter landscaping, but in this specific instance below, we have allowed you to. And the changes that will be upcoming to the parking courtyards, normally you can't use parking lot for private open space, but there will be a provision to say this parking courtyard. And the concept behind a parking courtyard is shared space for vehicles and pedestrians. And so that will be allowed to count for some of the private open space. So we wanted to clarify that even though that is also a vehicular area, it can count. Turning the page. We reduced the minimum inside dimension for upper story spaces such as balconies from 6 feet to 4 feet in order to count as private open space. And here we added the provision that your 15-foot minimum dimension may be reduced by 3 feet where abutting required site perimeter landscaping on the site, as long as the open space and the landscaping are not separated by a fence or other separating feature. The next one, 3I, is a provision to allow kind of your front porch area to count as private open space. It's not necessarily private because it's right on the front, it's usually on the street, but if it's a certain size and raised up above the public space, we're proposing to allow it to be counted as individual private open space for the unit to which it is attached.
What if it's shared?
Okay, go ahead.
What if it's shared?
Well, then it's neither private for an individual unit, nor is it kind of shared in common with everybody. So then it doesn't really meet the intent of this section.
Well, it's shared by residents, whether it's shared by all residents or some I mean, 60 feet's a huge space for one unit, I think, in a townhouse, in a land-poor city. But
Okay.
so you don't think that sharing it even just among residents, it's sort of all or nothing as it's currently proposed?
Yes.
Okay, I'm back to the units facing each other and a U-shaped.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had a porch on those, and they're facing each other. That porch doesn't count because it doesn't face the street. That seems to be,
That would probably count in a different way.
show me where.
Well, if you look to areas not credited, I mean, it would kind of depends on the size too. Like if you have a backyard, you know, if you have the backyard of a townhouse and you put a deck on it, that counts. So if you have a porch on the front, that you would have to have a minimum inside dimension of.
I'm not, I acquiesce to the dimensions. I just, and faces a street. That doesn't seem to me what, we don't need that limitation in there.
Well, we were trying to get at the idea that this was a front porch, because if you take out faces a street and now somebody puts an unenclosed porch on the back of their house that's not 60 square feet, then suddenly it looks like that doesn't count, and we weren't trying to say that because that would count.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. And then section 5 is taken, it's a little bit taken from the physical delineation grayed out piece at the top of the next page, 7-4. We removed the requirement for a fence, hedge, earth berm, railing, and or other continuous linear landscaping feature to define and separate ground level private open space from abutting streets and rights of way. We took that out, but we did keep the provision that private open space shall be separated from refuse collection areas by L1 visual enhancement landscaping. In the next section, this is about common private open space, and we learned this through the Grass Creek development that Cook Inlet brought forward, that when at least half of the required common private open space is required to be contiguous, you really only need, you don't need to go beyond a certain amount, because you can get, especially depending on the configuration of your lot, you can get some really kind of ridiculous requirements. So we limited it to a maximum of 3,000 square feet. In B3I, it's the same allowance as above, where you can reduce your dimension a little bit if you're abutting site perimeter landscaping, and the same refuse collection L1 separation at the bottom of the page. Turning to the next page, we were asked for some clarity about indoor private open space.
Erica, before you go on there, so I know it's not highlighted, but B 2I on the last page. Common private open space. I'm okay with conveniently accessible to residents or users, the nearest building, or any facade sharing a corner with the nearest building, or any facade directly facing the open space shall have a primary entrance. So you're basically what is primary? A primary entrance means the front entrance. It can be a back entrance. And I'll tell you what comes to mind is the Trailside project in South Anchorage. It's a townhouse and multifamily mixed project. There's a big open space area in the middle of it off of their community building, but the townhouses that border it don't have direct access or entries to it. It's still a really, because they're front entries on the street.
Do they have back doors?
No, they don't, because they're 3-story buildings, just a garage down below. They look over, they have visual access into the open space.
So this is in here. Are you familiar with the townhouses at, I think they're at 13th and Denali?
Yes.
So their open space is on the north side, which is the back of the building, and there's no entrances, there's no connection, there's nothing, just the space is completely unrelated to the development.
So how would you lay out that townhouse development in that scenario to meet it and meet parking and everything else?
Well, in this scenario, they would probably end up with fenced backyards.
Which
under
doesn't
this,
look
but-
great from a street standpoint. I mean, I think about this also with the Aurora Square on Wesleyan and Northern Lights. They back up. Basically, you're talking about space that's like the back of the building. It's not going to be great no matter what you do with it.
If we're going to require it, it needs to be usable. It needs to be accessible.
And I flat out disagree just with the notion that all open space has to be usable. Open space is both for use, but it's also to create space. I just vehemently am opposed to this idea that all of it has to be play space or usable space. It serves a function, even if it's not a 15 by 15 yard.
So I misspoke. I don't mean that it has to be usable in terms of you have to be able to throw a Frisbee, but I think it has to be accessible. And there's nothing in here that says it has to be play space. But I
guess my point is, just because there's no direct primary entrance doesn't mean it's not accessible. In fact, sometimes if you're creating common open space, you may not want it to be accessible because you want to attract people to use it. Anyway, I know we're not going to agree on that one. We'll move on.
So primary entrance is defined as a principal entry through which people, including customers, residents, or members of the public, enter a building. And we do, I think it's in this ordinance, make a differentiation between a primary front entrance and a primary entrance because back doors to residences would fall under the definition of primary entrance. Okay, I've covered indoor private open space, and then we reduced the minimum dimension for residential high-quality spaces from 25 to 23 feet.
Can you say why?
We're just trying to make it a little easier.
Let's make it 20.
It's 10%. Maybe it's a start. Okay. Do we have any questions on Section 4 as outlined? Mr. Robinson.
I think I'd move to go into the committee of the whole.
Mr. Springs seconded.
I don't have any problem with the purpose statements. Anybody? Section B, I will note that the ordinance that we passed previously, the open space for R3, our amendment said 250 square feet. So if we pass this at 280, we would be changing it to something else, which is fine, but just pointing it out. The reason why I think 250 was used is in an R3, 50-foot wide lot, and the 15-foot dimensions. I think if you do a fourplex with something over 250, you'd actually be serving to push the buildings back away from the street when you have an alley. In other words, because the only way in place you'd satisfy that likely would be on the front, and I don't think we want to be pushing those buildings back. That's my own interpretation from trying to look at projects. And I have no other issues until we get down to Section 2. Anybody else?
Go ahead.
Okay, Section 2. 2I, I get that it's an option, and I guess I'll live with it. I still think of, 4-foot, balcony. I think if you had a 1 or a 2-bedroom unit and you had a 3-foot dimension balcony off the narrower balcony off the front that you could still sit in off to the side, it would be sufficient. But I'm willing to let it slide. I think on 3I, I do like the idea of deleting and faces a street, and I think maybe counted as private open space for the units to which it is shared. I like the idea of combining decks, even if it's not among every unit. Might be between 2 or 3 or 4 units. I think that still can be some decent space. I get my issue. 60 square feet's pretty, it's starting to be kind of big for the townhouse units that we're building now to fit in town. They're typically 3-story. They're pretty narrow. There's not a lot there. And I worry that if you start to drive these, and I get it, it's an option, I get it, but you're trying to create these porches. Well, what's happening is if you create a bigger porch, you're creating a bigger footprint to the entire structure, and you're driving that footprint. That works in some cases, but if you're just doing 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom kind of narrow, the rustic goat kind of thing, you're going to be hard pressed to do it unless you can kind of share them and sort of cluster them, and it actually might make a decent feature, and you might be more interested in doing it.
Anyone else have any comments on that?
Well, I'll bring it up when we come out. The one other thing, on common private open space, I do on 2I, I don't know. I get the intent of saying the nearest building facade to the open space, any facade sharing a corner, shall have a primary entrance, but I'm fine with the first and last sentences of that 2I, that it be conveniently located and it will have good connections. I'm good with that. I just think it just simplifies it.
I've got these units around a quad, is what I picture. I've got a primary entrance, but I don't quite know how I comply with a walkway shall connect common private open space to primary building entrances. I don't quite, does that mean I put a sidewalk all the way around the quad and give up play area? I don't quite know what that...
Yeah, it shouldn't be to building entrances. It should be to, they should be connected, however or where you connect them to. It might be connected through an internal sidewalk of a development, right? I mean,
why not connect them to the grass? I mean, if I want my kids to go play out there, they don't want a sidewalk in the middle. They want to be able to run on the grass and play on the grass. And so I don't quite know.
What if you just leave the first sentence to that? Would everyone be good with that? Okay, and I just thought on the last one, minimum inside dimension, 23 is just a weird number. I mean, I probably will never build, well, maybe not, but, I guess if you're trying to get up, the point here is you're getting up from 15. Is this right, Erica?
From 18.
18 is, so it originally went from 15 to 18, because the minimum dimension is 15.
B3I says the minimum inside dimension for an area used to meet the requirement shall be 18 feet for residential uses and 15 feet for non-residential uses. So you're going from 18 to 23 for residential and 15 to 20 for non-residential.
The bottom and possibly residential on the top for downtown or R3 or R4. I don't know how you would fit this common area, this common private open space in that type of mixed-use application. I mean, if we're trying to create, in some instances, more dense multifamily.
Well, you bring up the point. I disagree with a lot of staff's narrative on page 9 of 26. We've talked about whether there are certain contexts where it's more appropriate to have less open space, where someone really wants more of an urbanized area. Maybe they want proximity to other things, but it's just harder to make those projects work. And they sort of dismiss it and say, the argument that less space is needed in more urban or dense contexts is already to a large degree addressed by the zoning districts. It's just, I don't agree. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and you just don't know, and we have this kind of one size fits all, really, except for the zoning districts. But you can have R4 in Midtown. You could have it in South Anchorage. You can have it in East Anchorage. I mean, are those contexts all the same? I don't know.
We're out of the committee of the whole.
I would like to, one thing I would like to ask, under 6, the payment of fees in lieu of set aside for land of private common open space is prohibited. I mean, do we need to say that? Was it ever contemplated in the first place?
I don't remember at this point. That was probably something left over from when Clarion first wrote this section.
I move that we come out of the committee of the whole.
We got a second? We're out of the committee of the whole. Mr. Robinson?
I think I'm going to do these one at a time. I think it's otherwise too confusing. So I move that we adopt Exhibit B, recommend approval of Exhibit B. And then I'm going to have a follow-up motions as we go, or if anyone else does as we work through, just in case I get it wrong.
Okay. We got a second by Commissioner Spring.
I'd like to, I think, generally supportive. I have a couple suggestions for the Commission's consideration. My first motion to the amendment is to amend the R3 district to 250 square feet of open space under Section B3. This makes it consistent with the ordinance that we passed previously, and and I think helps small infill lots.
Okay. You want to do these one by one at a time?
Yeah.
Any further discussion on that motion? Any further discussion at all? Everybody awake down there. Come on, wake up. All righty. No discussion, let's vote. That carried. Mr. Robinson.
I'm going to come back to one under B2I. I'd like to keep only the first sentence of B2I. Common private open space shall be conveniently accessible to residents or users of the development.
Ms. McConnell.
I have no idea how that will be implemented. Imagine you're a plan reviewer and you're trying to implement that on a plan. How do you make a judgment without the other sentences? I don't, who knows what conveniently accessible means?
I don't know what it means with it as written. I mean, I don't know that it works. I mean, I agree with you, and I wish we could button it all up, but I think sometimes less is more. I think some of this stuff is just common sense.
I would prefer you take the entire B2I out rather than leave that first sentence, because it will become meaningless. Staff will not be able to implement that.
Well, staff can't implement a lot of things right now because they can't figure out what this thing says. So what happens? The primary entrance thing, we just discussed it. So Trailside doesn't work. There's a primary entrance to a community building, but not a primary entrance to the residential building. Does that meet it? Does it not? Every building has to have it. I mean, to me...
No, it says the nearest building facade to the open space, any facade sharing a corner with the nearest building facade, or any facade directly facing the open space shall have a primary entrance. It sounds like, I'm not super familiar with your example, but it sounds like the community building would count.
But the other ones
would. But again,
wouldn't.
that was not designed according to these standards.
And it wouldn't be, given... I think I'll let my motion stand.
Okay. Commissioner Kange?
Speak to that motion. Yes, it is kind of subjective what conveniently accessible means, but I just read this and it's like I have to have my nearest building facade to the open space, any facade sharing a corner. I mean, it has to face towards this open space, and I don't tend to agree with that. So I would support the motion, but I would also, if we can't determine what's conveniently accessible or not, to some degree of swagger, I don't know.
I mean, to me, it would mean, we just did a development. It would mean not putting on an 8.5-acre site your only open space in the far corner of the site.
Exactly.
And at some point, you got to use some common sense.
Commissioner Spring?
Yeah, I agree. I think this addresses a real problem in the past. I mean, that's exactly what's happened in the past. In some cases, they shovel it off in the swale or something, and it's not usable. But I don't think this necessarily prevents that. It doesn't prevent it being shuttled off to the side. It just means that you have to connect to it. So you could put it out. I think I would rather direct staff to reword this, maybe to make it define the terms a little bit better. And I don't think we can do that here. And I don't want to drop it necessarily altogether. But I mean, that's not a good solution, but I don't think we're in the position of trying to solve that problem right here.
Well, we're working our way through it. We're going to get our way through it. It wasn't perfect when we got it. Unfortunately, it won't be perfect when we get rid of it. But we're going to try to make it better. That's all we can do. Any other discussion on item B2? Please use your machines. That passed 6-1. Mr. Robinson.
I think the last one that I'll try is back up under just above it. Are we 2A, 3I?
Faces the street.
You want? I mean, I could just get rid of that. I think it's otherwise too complicated to do it. So I'd say just delete and faces the street.
2A, 2A, 3 little I.
And I'll speak to it. I mean, I think I don't get me wrong. I agree with the premise. It's the design that, you know, when you actually go to lay out a site, what happens if what you're actually oriented to isn't the street, it's the driveway as part of the development. We had the discussion earlier. Well, what happens if it's facing some nice open space? Anyway, I think that you just can't always have a perfectly laid out neo-traditional design. As much as I like that type of layout, it's not always workable.
That was seconded by Commissioner Spring. Commissioner Spring. Any other comment on that? Seeing and hearing no comment, please vote. That passed 7-0.
And I'm gonna leave the high quality spaces alone.
Okay. Thank you very much. Section 5, Ms. McConnell, is the next one.
Oh, yeah, the main motion on the table.
Okay, all right, pardon me. I stand corrected.
I think the main motion is to adopt the section with the amendments that we just made.
We have a motion by Commissioner Robinson as soon as he hits his
Do I
screen.
need to resend?
We got a second by Commissioner Sporhayes. Any comment? Any discussion? Please use your machines.
What was that? You want me to withdraw?
What happened? You want to use thumbs?
It wasn't it. I mean, no, it's section
4. Section 4. Not until she gives us back. You want me to hit reset motion? Section 4 approved is amended. Motion by Robinson, seconded by Voorhees. Okay, use your machines. That motion carried. No? Let the record show that Mr. Strike excused himself. After 7 pain pills, it was not objected to. Gets us down to 6 then. Ms. McConnell, Section 5.
Section 5 amends the snow storage and disposal portion of Chapter 7. It tries to fix a disparity between the snow storage and the parking section. The parking section states that required parking can't be used for anything other than parking. And one of the reasons that this is important is because most of the required parking ratios were reduced to be more consistent with determined need. And so our parking levels that we're now requiring are a lot closer to what's actually needed, and there isn't as much extra parking available to be used for other uses. So the snow storage section is not clear about where you can store snow. So we're proposing an amendment at F3F to state that you cannot store snow for longer than a 72-hour temporary basis in required parking or circulation areas. Section F4F is a provision that was requested or approved by the Assembly Title 21 Committee to say that you can use your entire private open space as snow storage, removing a condition that go through a review and that you remove the snow and the trash accumulation on the area by May 1st. Staff does not agree with this and proposes an amendment on page 23 of 26 in the staff report that would allow up to half of residential private open space to be used for snow storage as long as it's cleaned of snow and trash by May 1st.
Mr. Robinson and Mr. Spring.
How do you determine how much space is needed for snow storage?
There have been studies done that indicate that about 20% of a paved area is needed to actually store snow. What our requirement actually does is, I think, let me look it up, we're less than that.
I believe we're 10%.
Well, it varies between residential and non-residential. So if you are going to provide permanent, all winter long snow storage on site, you have to provide 10% of the surface area that will be plowed for residential uses or 5% for non-residential uses. However, you have the ability to use an alternative snow management strategy, and then you don't have to provide any permanent snow storage area.
Commissioner Spring?
I'm sorry, must be getting late. I see the discussion on page 11 of 26. Where is it in the ordinance?
It's on page 5 of 8.
5 of 8. Oh. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
This was well argued during Title 21. The effect of this ordinance would be to make every commercial parking lot in Anchorage 5% bigger.
Only if they choose to permanently store snow all winter.
But when we don't have this, and it's worked out fine before, we don't need to make our parking lots bigger. Our accuracy on parking is nowhere near plus or minus 5%. Every business in town will tell you that if they're turning away customers, they're going to haul snow. But if they're not turning away customers, they're going to stack snow. And, I mean, if you're developing a piece of property, the first thing is you determine the area that you got, and then you go ask your architect, how big of a building can I build and meet the required parking? And if we're providing if the parking lot gets bigger, the building gets smaller. And until there's a need, a proven need, not just a wish or a hope, I can't support this. I really can't. And it keeps coming back. We have not had a snowy winter for a couple of years. And even when we do, it gets handled. I cannot support this. There's not an economic need to show it. And I disagree with the May 1 date. Some years that's a month late, and some years that's a month early on that. Commissioner Spring. Thank you. I mean, it just, we're making, we talk about how we're making parking lots smaller, but when we did that analysis, we had no snow removal. If we put the snow removal in it, the parking lots just got bigger. They got bigger to park fewer cars because we got the landscaping and the paths and everything else, and they're looking nicer, but we don't need this. I can't support it. Are you back in?
Yes, I am now. So I think won't go into we won't have to go to the committee of whole maybe on this one, but I agree with you to think about the use of open space, but what about the condition that the snow pile and trash accumulation from plowed snow be removed and the space made usable by May 1st? Is that a reasonable?
I want it to be cleaned up and made usable when
it melts. Huh?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well,
when the weather permits or something like that. I mean, some years on May 1st, I mean, we've still got snow falling, and some years we don't. And I can't tell you what the weather's going to do, John.
So you aren't in favor of that kind of statement, or just because it's so vague? And
I'm not in favor of a date specific. I would be in favor, a little bit like snow tires, you know, a date 30 days after the state says your snow tires have to be off. You know, so have a date that reflects the real world, not just coming up and pulling a date out of the air. I mean, this past year, we could have used March 1 and probably been good. You know, and so on that. But the chair needs a motion.
So, Jim, I'm sorry, Chair, could you explain again? You're looking for a motion regarding Section 5, correct? And you're looking for a motion to say, I'm just trying to make sure I understand, that to not accept the changes.
We'll make a motion to accept the changes and we can vote it down.
Okay,
It has
thank
to be in a
you.
positive form.
Okay,
Mr. Kanes beat you.
Thank you.
thank you.
With regard to Section 5, F, snow storage and disposal, I move to accept changes as presented.
We have a second by Ms. Dean. Mr. Spring.
Okay, just to clarify then, so if we vote in favor, we're saying that snow piles no longer than on a 27-hour temporary basis shall not be placed in required parking spaces or circulation area, and also the deletion of the phrases required residential private open space and only on the condition that snow pile are removed.
That's right. That's technically.
Yeah. Yes.
So required residential should not be allowed, Required residential, okay. So if we vote it down, then we would be saying that it would be allowed under residential private open space, right?
Correct.
And that there wouldn't be any requirement for 72-hour temporary?
No, there wouldn't be.
So they could put it on parking.
Yeah, basically, which is the rule we've existed for many years. And it hasn't been a problem. I mean, the problem we run into is they want it hauled within 3 days, but City Hall doesn't even get the city snow hauled within 3 days when we get a big dump. You know, and so let's just let it go like it was.
In the commercial building that I rent space, my landlord only hauls when there's not enough parking.
That's basically what's going to happen.
Exactly. I mean,
Just to speak to my motion, I won't be supporting my motion. I think that the markets will dictate, tenants will dictate through their leases at what point they don't have enough parking. Therefore, I won't be supporting this motion.
Can I have one more clarification on this? How does this apply to perimeter landscaping? Is that considered, part of that can be considered open space now, right? Now, 3 foot of that could be considered open space. I don't think that's a good idea, to allow snow to be piled up on required landscaping.
I don't think you can currently pile snow in the landscaping area.
But we just recommended changing the requirements on a number of cases where they can count that as open space if they don't have a barrier.
Yeah, I don't think that impacts this, John.
Well, I'd ask staff that, I guess.
Well, it's both setback and it's open space. I mean, it's both required landscaping and it's open space. So in as much as it's required landscaping, then it would.
I'd ask staff if that's their interpretation.
If you vote down F4F, then it would go back to what it originally said, which said the site plan shall not, unless allowed through an administrative site plan review, designate snow storage areas in required perimeter landscaping, required residential private open space, or on required trees.
Okay.
And the rest of it.
Okay. So, yeah. So even though it's open space, it's still required landscaping. Okay. Okay.
Any further discussion on this?
Again, what Erica just said was that if you vote no, then you will not be deleting the sections in F4.
That's true.
So if you'd like to do this and reject the operational standards, you ought to do it individually and then separately take up F4.
Maybe I got to read F4.
Can I ask that we bifurcate the motion?
Yes, that'd be perfect.
Section F into F3 and F4?
Is that okay, Mr. Gaines? And so F3 adds the language, snowplows stored longer than on a 72-hour temporary basis shall not be placed in required parking spaces or circulation areas.
That's on the table.
That's on the table.
Do I need a second for the bifurcation?
We got it. Okay, so this is to,
Can we call the question on that first part then?
yes. Okay, the motion is to delete the language in F3. Well, no, the motion is to accept the language in F3, and if we, okay on that one.
Do we need to separately hit this? Motion we're challenging Lori here tonight.
At 10:30, we're challenging everybody. Why Right, is it, when we get tired, it gets tired. Not yet. There we go. Motion to bifurcate, okay. We want to vote no. Oh, yes to bifurcate, okay. Okay, the motion to bifurcate is passed. Now we're back to Mr. Kange's motion. F3. F3. Who seconded that before? Okay. All right. This is to approve F3. If you don't like it, you vote no. If you approve it, you vote yes. That motion passed 5-1. That motion failed 5-1. Failed 5-1. Okay. Now I need a motion on F4.
Same Mr. Kange's motion with Ms. Dean.
Okay. Oh, we got that one screwed up good. Well, that one didn't pass. It was 4-2, or 4 in favor, 2 against.
You got it wrong.
No, I think it, I didn't want it to pass.
You did want it to pass.
I didn't want it to pass. I wanted it to fail.
Well, you wanted the language deleted, didn't you?
Yeah, I wanted the language deleted, and he made a motion to include them, so I voted against it.
Approval.
Well, no, wait a minute. At the end, we didn't get 5 votes.
The approval would have deleted the language in all caps. Deletion keeps the language in all, or voting no keeps the language in all caps.
But it didn't pass.
So all caps remains.
Yes.
I'm still totally confused. Here was my intent, and I don't know what procedurally you can do. I believe that a motion to approve it as written meant that you were going to approve the deletions proposed by the ordinance. So voting yes would have deleted the words. Absolutely.
Voting yes would have approved the motion as stated in the packet on page 5 of 8, paragraph F4. We voted no, so those weren't, the motion did not carry, so they were not accepted. But I think this tells me we're too tired to go on. Yeah. So that was not, anyway, we didn't adopt it. Either way. If you want to reconsider it, it's got to be one of the 2 people that voted no. No, you have to be in the, God.
The prevailing side.
Well, the prevailing side, because it didn't pass, was where there was 2.
Correct.
2 no, 4 yes. So the prevailing reminds me of Diamond High the first time. 2 votes were one of the 2 votes.
I believe I was a no vote. I moved to reconsider.
Were you no vote?
Was it a yea vote?
Mr. Robinson, you are a yay vote.
Yeah, the who and the no votes.
is what we're saying.
No, you got it wrong. I was, and Mr. Kange were, but we got what we wanted. It didn't pass, so the language doesn't go in. Right?
The language that you are recommending to the Assembly is as follows. The site plan shall not, unless allowed through an administrative site plan review, designate snow storage areas and required perimeter landscaping, required residential private open space, or on required trees. Designation of required residential private open space for snow storage shall be permitted only on the condition that the snow pile and trash accumulation from plowed snow be removed and the space made usable by May 1. You moved to approve the change, and then you voted against approving the change, which means you're rejecting the change that's proposed here. Going back to the original language.
No, but when you read that, you read the caps as well, I think, Erica.
Because the caps was the change which you rejected.
So you shouldn't have read the caps.
No, you said you don't want it to be changed, so we'll leave the language as it was adopted. We won't delete the things in caps. We'll leave the language as adopted because you didn't recommend making the change. The caps are the change. You have to move to
Okay, the reconsideration has to be by the prevailing side. The prevailing side is Mr. Kange and myself.
And 4 other people voted no.
No. No, there were 4 yes, but that is not prevailing. It takes 5.
There were 4 yeses and 2 nos.
That's what I said. You two need to reconsider and then vote yes.
No, we need to Ms. Dean, then Mr. Voorhees.
I can wait until this issue is done because I have something to say about the next issue. So I
don't think we're going to get to the next issue tonight.
Well, that was my issue, actually.
Mr. Voorhees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I understand correctly. Since we were on the prevailing side with 4 yes votes, then one of us have to reconsider, correct?
No, you're not on the prevailing side.
Because the motion didn't pass.
Right.
Trust me, the motion needs to pass. Reconsider. He can't. You have to do it.
Why does it need to pass? Explain that to me.
I move to approve. I move for reconsideration of the prior vote.
Okay. Do we have a second on a move to reconsider? We have a second. Mr. Potter may have to come up here. Okay. All right. We have a motion to reconsider. We have a second. Please vote. Damn. Okay. That motion to reconsider has passed. Now,
In case 2015-0049, I move to approve Section 5, F4, little f, as submitted.
I have a second by Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean, then Mr. Voorhees. That all disappeared. Down to Mr. Robinson.
I recommend a yes vote if you desire to remove the all caps letter in that proposal.
I guess I'll be supporting my motion then.
Okay. Please vote. Wow, that passed. The chair, okay, when are we, Ms. McConnell, when can we take up the remaining portions of this?
On the 20th?
Okay? I don't think we need a work session or anything else. Will you please put that on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Spring, you're not here on the 20th, is that correct?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's a kind of in flux. I don't, I have to be flexible. I may not be.
Okay.
I don't think you can count on me. But being
Okay, anyone else not showing up on the 20th?
After tonight, I'm not showing up.
Okay, now, that gets us down to 6 for that. And that gets us in jeopardy because Spinelli, well, we didn't have any public testimony tonight, did we? So Spinelli could participate. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, no public testimony, okay.
Well, there was public testimony, was there not?
Not,
Yes, there was.
yeah, but it was a couple weeks ago. He'd have to listen to that public testimony, you're correct. Yeah, okay.
I have to be here
Yes, you do. The chair would accept a motion to continue this discussion on August 20th. Need a second. July. I need a second. Thank you, Ms. Dean. Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. Okay, now, how many commissioners have a copy of the new Title 21 book? Raise your hand. 2 commissioners say yes. 3 say yes. 3 say no. So, can you accommodate the ones without it, please? Okay.
I'm hesitant to print new copies until some of these amendments get decided.
Good point.
What do you mean? I mean, it's online in 2 different ways. Then you could donate your hard copy to one of the other commissioners. Ah, if you're not looking at it, it'd be awesome to pass it on. Or if you prefer the electronic version. Sure.
We got a motion to adjourn by Mr. Sporhees, seconded by Ms. Dean. All in favor, say aye. God almighty.
Is Walker not here?